Chapter 431. School ended a little late that day, because the people who had been watching Daoist Guang's live stream with Dopigua in the morning had all been detained. Not only that, they had also implicated almost the entire class. Taking advantage of the time after school, Teacher Pen focused her fire on Super Chin and Dopigua, these two mischievous gods who had a mischievous is healthier learning attitude all year round, and held an hour-long denunciation meeting. There was only one person who Teacher Pan let go early as an exception, and that was Lotus Sunday. Actually, the students in the class could understand, Teacher Pan couldn't afford to provoke a young miss of this level at all. What impressed Wang Ling the most was that after seeing Lotus Sun off with a smile on her face, Teacher Pan's expression immediately changed when she returned to the classroom. It could be said that she changed faces faster than one could turn the page of a book. Furthermore, Teacher Pan specially explained why she had let Lotus Sun go early. Student Lotus Sun has good grades, never messes around, and is obedient and sensible. Furthermore, she personally called me to explain the situation, otherwise I wouldn't have let her go so easily, even if it was student Lotus Sun. Am I, Pan Xingtsong, the kind of person who would bow down to the rich and powerful? This time, Wang Ling heard the students in the class say in unison, yes. The days were very long in Songhai City in July. It was almost 6:30 when Wang Ling left the school gates, but the sky was still bright and there wasn't even a sunset glow to be seen. Wang Ling followed Super Chin and Dopigua, and heard the two of them grumbling as they walked. Dopigua, this old Pan, she really doesn't give us any face. She's definitely the worst teacher in charge I've ever seen in my 16 years at school. Now that she's taken our phones, I'm afraid we won't be able to get them back. Super Chin chuckled. Isn't it just over 90 marks in each subject? What's so great about that? Let old Pan take a look at the results. Dopigua was startled. Since when have you been so ambitious? Super Chin, actually, if you think about it carefully, while old Pan has her flaws, it's not easy. She's been in charge of so many elite classes, but none of them rank well in the district. People inside and outside the school gossip about her behind her back, but she doesn't care at all, and insists on being the first one to come to school every morning. Speaking up to this point, Dopigua was a little silent, because what Super Chin said was true. There was no doubt about Teacher Pan's professionalism. Super Chin, also, think about it, during the Shuego sect incident last time, old Pan was busy contacting her parents for so many days, but you never saw her complain about anything. She's usually quite domineering, but she also has her merits. Dopigua frowned slightly. Now that you mention it, it doesn't seem unreasonable. Wang Ling followed them with an indifferent expression on his face. He completely hadn't expected to suddenly hear the two mischievous gods in class, who usually resented Teacher Pan the most, actually discuss her merits. TSK, he must have drunk some fake wine or taken some fake medicine. Just as Wang Ling stepped out of the school gate, he saw Super Chin, who had already reached the crossroads ahead of him. As if he had been startled awake from a nightmare, he broke out in a cold sweat and took a few deep breaths. F***K. I was scared to death. Dopigua. Super Chin, when you walked out of the teaching building just now, didn't you feel old Pan's gaze on your back? Dopigua, no, Super Chin said in a very low voice, a golden core cultivator's ears are very sharp. But it's usually safe once you walk out of the school. Dopigua, then what you said just now, Super Chin rubbed his chin. What I said from the bottom of my heart, half of it was true. Wang Ling sized them up from a distance. Then, he saw a beautiful woman with long, flowing hair and fair skin in high heels standing next to Super Chin and Dopigua. The corners of Wang Ling's mouth twitched. Wasn't this Teacher Pan's second form? Because of school rules, teachers weren't allowed to wear heavy makeup or take any youthful drugs. Teacher Pan usually looked like a middle-aged auntie at school. However, Wang Ling had seen Teacher Pan's youthful form before. Back when Teacher Pan had paid him a home visit, she had done so in this youthful form. The old man had even made Teacher Pan a sweet and sour spare ribs set meal, which was still fresh in Wang Ling's memory. But Wang Ling was the only one who had seen this form halfway through the first semester of grade 1. Standing next to Super Chin and Dopey Gua on the side of the road, Teacher Pan pretended not to know them as she secretly listened to their conversation. Dopey Gua, that's why you were so full of praise for old Pan at school, as if you had taken the wrong medicine. Super Chin scared and put his arm around Dopey Gua's back. You come to school early in the morning with me every day to copy homework for so long, why haven't you raised your vigilance at all? But it's also possible that my seat is closer to the door, so I'm usually more vigilant. Dopey Gua couldn't help laughing. TSK, are you crazy? Super Chin, to be honest, I feel like old Pan is right next to us. Next to them, the corners of Teacher Pan's mouth twitched. When Wang Ling got home, he found that Sheep was particularly excited today. She had changed into a new set of clothes. This was a gothic purple-black dress with a small lace umbrella. Today, Wang Ling had asked Sheep to deliver the tattered Daoist robe to Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who had then accompanied her to Fatty Luo's place to have it repainted. Sheep's clothes in her human form had a lot to do with the paint on her body. The higher the quality of the paint, the purer the color, and the more gorgeous the clothes in her human form. As for the small lace umbrella, it was a gift from Fatty Luo. However, Wang Ling felt that the material of this small umbrella seemed a little familiar. Back in his room, Wang Ling texted Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal to say that Sheep was home, and asked about the progress of the space assessment. About 5 or 6 minutes later, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal replied, "Ha ha ha. It's good that you're home. The space assessment is still in process, and it will take some time for the instrument to start up. Also, we still have to adjust the data. Brother Ling, don't worry. I'll keep an eye on it. By the way, Sheep should be very happy today, right? Fatty Luo specially made that white lace umbrella." Wang Ling couldn't help asking, "What material is it made of?" Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, Little Silver's fur fell off at my house. Wang Ling, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, I heard that Brother Loopy Toad teased Little Silver last time, and it seems that the blow of breaking up had a big impact on him. Chapter 432. It turned out to be a white lace umbrella made from Little Silver's holy beast fur. Wang Ling broke into a sweat. This could be considered maximizing Little Silver's value. After all, every part of a holy beast's body was a treasure. But it was clear that Fatty Luo hadn't put much effort into making this white lace umbrella. From the very beginning, he had treated it as a decorative magic treasure. But even so, because of Little Silver's holy beast fur, this lace umbrella, which hadn't taken much effort to make, was still an 8th-class holy weapon. If he had plucked out Little Silver's fur just to make this umbrella, that would have been a little too much. Wang Ling put his school bag on the table and took out a thick stack of revision materials. The two gremlins' pen and eraser had already appeared on either side of Wang Ling like door gods the moment he approached the desk. Seeing this scene, Sheep very consciously left the room with the lace umbrella. No one could disturb Ling Jinren when he was studying. This had already become the #1 rule for all the gremlins in the Wang family who had been enlightened by Wang Ling. Wang Ling pulled out his chair and found that Loopy Toad was lying under the desk, fast asleep as it played with its phone. Wang Ling glanced at the screen and realized that Loopy Toad was actually also watching Daoist Guang's live stream. But at this point in time, the live stream room was already black, which meant that Daoist Guang had already gone offline. Wang Ling looked at the number of followers in Daoist Guang's live stream room. In just one day, Daoist Guang, who used the live streamer ID, Lord Island, had already gained nearly 800,000 followers, and this number was still rising. Even though the live stream room was now black, these 800,000 light chasers were still discussing Lord Island's live stream content tirelessly in the room. Wong Ling had only heard of the game PUBG, but had never played it before. However, he had personally participated in a live version of PUBG during the military training for the 6 schools. Logically speaking, this was Daoist Guang's first time playing this type of online game, so he definitely wouldn't be very good at it. But looking at the bullet messages in the live stream room, the audience seemed very satisfied with Daoist Guang's performance. The corner of Wong Ling's mouth twitched. Based on the number of new fans, he felt that Daoist Guang's suggestion of erecting 9,981 statues around the world and finding 99,981 disciples for the Samsara Spirit Tribulation task didn't seem too difficult. After all, on the first day alone, 800,000 people had already turned into light chasers. But making a statue was a little complicated, but if he could really gather a group of loyal and fanatical fans, anything was possible. Wong Ling sat at his desk and curiously opened the chat app. There were no messages in the 3-person chat group, but Daoist Guang had sent him several private messages, the first of which had been sent at 10:00 last night. He remembered that he had been thinking about something at that time, and hadn't checked the message at all. Furthermore, it was very rare for him to receive private messages, so unless someone had added him personally or used shock, it might take a long time before he noticed them. Of course, there were 2 exceptions. One was grenade-throwing senior immortal, and the other was Wang Ming. These 2 people were on Wong Ling's special watch list. Message received at 10:03 last night. First, Senior Ling. I'm starting a live stream, remember to come and support me when you're free. Second, oh my. Why are there so many people? At the beginning, there were only 2 or 3 people in my live stream room. I cracked a coconut with my spit, and suddenly there were 1,000 more people. Wong Ling, message received at 0:06 today. Third, F***K. Senior Ling, has broken 100,000. I just used the iron crotch skill to crush 2 coconuts, who would have thought that it would attract so much attention. Message received at 1:15 today. Fourth, Senior Ling, there are more and more people. I suddenly feel that if there were more people, it wouldn't be too difficult to gather believers and erect statues. Wong Ling, message received at 17:02 today. This was the latest message, which Daoist Guang had sent to Wong Ling after he went off the live stream. Daoist Guang, Senior Ling, you might not believe it, but I've already gained 800,000 fans through live streams this year. During the live stream just now, I asked them if they wanted to help me erect a statue. In the end, they all asked if I wanted to make figurines. Senior Ling, do you know what figurines mean? How do you make them? Wong Ling was stupefied when he saw this message. Loopy Toad lay at Wong Ling's feet. This time, it wasn't because of its narcolepsy, but because it had naturally entered a dream. The Toad clan rarely dreamed, so every time it did, Loopy Toad would remember it very clearly, and it felt especially real. A dream of omens. After its first experience, Loopy Toad was already used to it. It could maintain a clear consciousness in its dreams. In the dream this time, its field of vision was fixed somewhere, and it was completely unable to move. But the scene in the dream was very familiar to Loopy Toad. Because this was the sky-swallowing Toad clan's Temple of Heroes, where statues of all the leaders who had led the Toad clan had been erected. Wait a minute. So, had it become a statue? Loopy Toad suddenly seemed to understand something. Out of the corner of its eye, it glanced at the statue next to it. Although it couldn't see it clearly, Loopy Toad could already confirm that this was the 9th generation demon king of the previous sky-swallowing Toad clan, the 9th generation leader. The 9th generation was also the most special generation, because Loopy Toad had just been born when the 8th generation leader had died, and the clan had been leaderless. As an old minister who had assisted the 8th generation leader, the 9th generation leader had taken office under enormous public pressure. He had become the 9th-generation demon king of the Sky-swallowing toad clan. After that, the Sky-swallowing toad clan had been invaded by other demon clans, and the 9th-generation leader had died a very tragic death in a chaotic battle with the demon race. Loopy Toad remembered that it had inherited the 8th-generation leader's bloodline from a young age, and had been pushed onto the throne the year the 9th-generation leader died, becoming the 10th-generation leader. For a very long time after that, the Sky-swallowing toad clan hadn't been invaded by other clans after the 9th-generation leader had risked his life in battle. As for the story of the 9th-generation leader and Loopy Toad's father, it had been told to Loopy Toad by an elder in the clan. This was an old minister of the Sky-swallowing toad clan who had once assisted its father, and was called Elder One by the 9th-generation leader. Furthermore, he was currently the most senior elder of the Sky-swallowing toad clan, and the clan called him Elder One. In the dream, Loopy Toad recalled a lot of things. Suddenly, its eyes widened. If the statue next to it was the 9th-generation leader, then the statue that it had turned into was actually itself. In the next moment, the dream changed once again. The Temple of Heroes, which was originally empty, was now filled with tens of thousands of Toad Clan officials. Is this a prayer ceremony? Loopy Toad felt like it had seen this scene before, and couldn't help recalling the prayer ceremony it had seen as a child. It had also been in the Hall of Heroes, and the same tens of thousands of important clan ministers had prostrated themselves and kowtowed to several huge stone statues after praying. Loopy Toad saw Elder One standing at the very front, reciting the clan's incantation. Only people of the Sky-swallowing toad clan could understand this incantation. It was like a hometown dialect. Every demon clan had their own hometown dialect. Loopy Toad had never forgotten it. It just looked at Elder One, and then suddenly woke up with a start. Under the desk, its head was drenched in cold sweat. If it hadn't heard wrong, Elder One hadn't been reciting the incantation to pray, but to ask for help. Chapter 433. The prophetic dream was as real as ever. This time, it was so real that Loopy Toad felt like its soul had left its body. Loopy Toad was stunned to realize that when it woke up, it was sweating profusely. If it wasn't for the fact that this sweat had no smell, people would have thought it was peeing on the ground. The moment it entered the dream, Loopy Toad really felt like it had turned into a statue. Perhaps it was already a statue. After 6 years, the clan's ministers should have already accepted the fact that it had died. In these 6 years, forget about erecting a statue in the clan's Temple of Valhalla. Even if they wanted to tear down the previous statues and build a new one, there would still be time. Loopy Toad scratched its head and felt a little irritated. It hadn't expected its second prophetic dream to actually be about its clan. It heard every word of Elder One's call for help very clearly, like thunder piercing its ears. After its death, the Sky-swallowing toad clan hadn't appointed a new king for a long time, and the enemy clan, the 9 Nether Python clan, was about to declare war on them. Loopy Toad knew that without a clan leader to lead them and with morale lacking for several years in a row, they would definitely lose this battle. Loopy Toad panted heavily. When it raised its head, it saw that little Masterling was doing homework, so it silently lay back down on the ground. To be honest, Loopy Toad didn't know what to say. In theory, its current appearance already had nothing to do with the Sky-swallowing toad clan, but it clearly remembered every word that Elder One had said in the Hall of Heroes in its dream. 6 years had passed, and no new king had been appointed. As the oldest official in the clan, Elder One had always believed that it was still alive. Loopy Toad found this hard to believe, and it instantly felt a complicated emotion that it didn't know if it was lament or emotion. It had to think of a way to solve this problem. If that really didn't work, she could look for Wong Ling and act cute. It was a rare quiet night. There was nothing going on in the chat group. Daoist Guang was busy researching the live stream and the figurines. Wang Ling was busy revising and reading. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was in Wang Ming's research institute testing the sword chi on the Daoist robe, and Little Silver was trying his best to walk out of the shadow of his heartbreak. Father Wong, on the other hand, was doing his best to think of the right words to use in a new round of battle with the keyboard warriors in the study. Originally, Father Wong's daily battle with the keyboard warriors took place on the toilet on his phone. But now that Mother Wong had forced the Wong family to switch to a thermostatic toilet, Father Wong had to stand up after sitting for less than 2 minutes. Otherwise, if he sat for too long, he would have to sprinkle some cumin on him and he would be grilled meat on a grill. So now Father Wong could only sacrifice some time to watch female live streamer, Little Xian, live stream to clean up his book review section and fight the trolls. Father Wong had a lot of fans, but a lot of fans also meant a lot of haters. No matter which book it was, no matter how well written it was, there would always be haters. Father Wong remembered that when he had just started out and wasn't that popular, he had run into 1 or 2 haters, and he had always liked to directly use his author account to fight them. But now that he was popular, Father Wong could pick his opponents when he fought keyboard warriors. Most of the trolls on the official website only sent trash talk that was all-purpose. Father Wong had long since stopped replying to these trolls who were suspected of being water armies, and had directly banned and deleted them permanently. Out of sight, out of mind. When you had authority, you could do whatever you wanted. After so many years of grinding in the online novel circle, Father Wong had gradually discovered some of the characteristics of the trolls. First, this group of trolls were generally pirated users who didn't subscribe. When they weren't happy with what they saw on the pirated website, they would start by flaming out. Then, afraid that the author wouldn't see them, they would specially register an account on the official website to continue flaming out. So every time Father Wong saw this kind of trolls with no books on the bookshelf and 0 fan points, he would always sigh with emotion in his heart. Why were there such senseless people in the world? In the end, it was because the teacher assigned too little homework. Second, trolls generally liked to talk about their experiences. The strength of this group of trolls was slightly stronger than the group of trolls above. Every time they trolled, they especially liked to use allusions and examples to prove how many years of books they had read and how much wisdom they had. What they liked the most was to make wild guesses and think themselves clever, comparing the author they flamed with the author they liked, trampling on the former and praising the latter. Little did they know that the authors in the same circle had a very good relationship with each other. They rewarded each other on the fan list and talked cheerfully and wittily. Father Wong's conclusion about this type of trolls was that their brains might have been replaced with placenta at birth, which resulted in their intelligence not being fully developed. All they had was their bodies, not their brains. This was because people with real IQ and experience were very low-key and would never show off. Third, trolls generally wouldn't read a book completely before commenting on it. Father Wong had actually seen a lot of this type of trolls. He felt that if you wanted to comment on a book, at the very least, you had to read the official version first. Then, after reading 70 to 80% of the original version, you could express your opinion. If you had already spent money and bought a bad product, it was your right to give a bad review. Father Wong felt that people who hadn't spent money and who hadn't even read a few chapters would probably be very unhappy in their daily lives. Father Wong had seen a lot of haters and trolls online over the years, but for the most part, he didn't find it strange at all. If he could use his authority to directly ban them, he would do so without any superfluous words. If he couldn't use his authority, mobilizing fans to report things was also a pretty good choice. Every time Father Wong saw someone retweet a troll's comment in the official reader group, he would tell his fans not to get worked up or swear, and that everyone should just send a smile emoji, because people would always be people and monkeys would always be monkeys. Arguing with monkeys would actually make you look very stupid. Of course, there was one exception, and that was when Father Wong encountered comments that not only attacked him, but also his readers. Whether one read the official version or the pirated version, this actually had something to do with national conditions. But whether it was the official version or the pirated version, Father Wong didn't want his readers to be wantonly attacked and trampled on by this group of trolls. This was Father Wong's bottom line. In front of the screen, Father Wong lit a cigar and puffed out a cloud of smoke. He had just seen a very interesting long comment in the book friend group, which had been forwarded by a loyal official reader from some pirated software. The ID of the troll who had posted the long comment was 3 vats of Mang Po's soup. This troll perfectly combined all the characteristics of the aforementioned trolls. Not only did he flout the work and the author, he even bombarded the work's fans. He felt that the fans who read Father Wong's work were teenagers aged 14 to 16 who didn't have the 3 views of the world and didn't have the ability to distinguish between good and bad. The funniest thing was that this troll actually suspected Father Wong of manipulating the reading figures of the pirated software at the bottom of the post. Standing next to Father Wong, Lai Meng Meng couldn't help exclaiming after reading the long comment, "I'm afraid this isn't a fool's errand. What kind of author manipulates the reading figures of pirated software?" Father Wong laughed. This guy already didn't switch his brain with a placenta when he was born. It's possible that his mother threw him away at birth and left the placenta behind to grow up. Lai Meng Meng, want to fight back? Fight back. Of course. Flaming him was one thing, but flaming his fans was unforgivable. Father Wong raised his eyebrows and his fingers flew. He came up with a couplet and posted it. First line, keyboard big shot has strong trolling power. Second line, pirated hero gives pointers to the country. Horizontal line, M. D. Z. Z. Lai Meng Meng. Chapter 434. Father Wong's action actually wasn't a surprise, since Lai Meng Meng was already used to it. But this time, Lai Meng Meng hadn't expected Father Wong to personally use his author account to respond publicly. In Lai Meng Meng's view, this troll's card was pretty big. This time, he might really be immortalized. Lai Meng Meng felt that being a fan of Father Wong was actually a pretty happy thing. But a response was a response. In the end, this troll had written a 1,000-word long review on a pirated website to attack Father Wong's work and his fans who liked it. How could you make this troll stop? Usually, the only way was to mobilize the power of the original readers to report him together. Father Wong hadn't even made any appeals, but the fans in the group were already riled up and spontaneously organized wave after wave of attacks to report Father Wong to customer service one after another. On the side, Lai Meng Meng scared repeatedly at this operation. This was a manifestation of fan cohesion. As a top guru on the website, Father Wong's fan group was naturally extremely cohesive. Father Wong looked at his watch. About 5 minutes later, he refreshed the web page again, and all the trolls' comments, including the long review, had disappeared. Lai Meng Meng wiped at his sweat. It's all gone. That was too fast. Lai Meng Meng suddenly felt a little sorry for this troll. This guy didn't have enough IQ to begin with. He had rummaged through elementary school language books and painstakingly written a 1,000-word negative review, thinking that no one would pay attention to him if he posted it on a pirated software and could do whatever he wanted. In the end, he had been reported and deleted as soon as he sent it. Father Wong smiled calmly and took a drag on his cigarette. How far has he gotten? Believe it or not, he'll keep posting. He's courting death. Can he write so many words? Father Wong thought carefully and laughed. I'm guessing he's going to use the knowledge he learned in Peppa Pig as a child. Lai Meng Meng. After another half an hour, Father Wong refreshed the webpage again. Very good. Sure enough, this troll struggled to come up with another 200 words. The reply was as follows. First of all, I indeed don't have the financial ability to buy all the books. Rent in first-tier cities is too expensive, so I can only choose good books to buy. It's not realistic to buy all of them, but I'll also buy physical books if they're published, and I won't go around advertising pirated versions. You said the author singled me out. May I ask, how did the author know? Is the author also using pirated software? Or could it be that the true fans, of the pirated software went to complain to the author. If it's the former, what right do you have to criticize me? If it's the latter, I can only say that the author is Lu Dongbin. After reading it, Lai Mengmeng scratched his head. What does he mean by that? Why does it feel like your logic is contradictory? Let me analyze it for you. Father Wang smiled and pointed at the screen as he analyzed it sentence by sentence. Look at his first sentence, he said, I indeed don't have the financial ability to buy all the books. Rent in first-tier cities is too expensive, so I can only choose the good ones to buy. The subtext was, you're blaming me for watching pirated versions because the rent is too expensive. That's why I scrimped and lived frugally to choose books to read, and all I read are the 4 great classical novels. Lai Mengmeng, Father Wang, let's look at the second sentence. He says, how did the author know? Is the author also using pirated software? The subtext of this sentence was, I was caught off guard. I thought no one would see my ramblings. Since the fans of this book are all fake reviewers, then the author must have read a pirated version. Lai Mengmeng, the third sentence is actually the funniest one. If it's the latter, then I can only say that the author is really Lu Dongbin. Subtext, I am a dog. Lai Mengmeng snickered. After parsing these words, Father Wang stared at the screen and couldn't help thinking. This batch of trolls really have no standards. After saying that, Father Wang straightaway picked up the phone on the table and started to flip through the address book. Lai Mengmeng, who is Brother Wang looking for? Father Wang replied lightly, Doctor. Lai Mengmeng, what for? Father Wang couldn't help laughing. You were bitten by a dog, you need to get vaccinated. Lai Mengmeng, elsewhere, at the Cultivation Academy of Sciences Research Institute, the spatial assessment was ready. Wang Ming and grenade-throwing Senior Immortal were now in front of a giant eggshell-shaped glass dome, and they could clearly see a tiny space crack inside. This crack was not created by magic, but by the decomposition of space by modern technology. Brother Wang Ming, will this work? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal asked curiously. Hands in his pockets, Wang Ming nodded confidently. Of course it won't be a problem. We've already tested this machine several times before, and its performance is up to standard. However, it does take a long time to warm up and start up. There's still room for improvement. Wang Ming then took out the tattered Daoist robe that grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had brought, but just as he was about to approach the glass dome, Zhai Yin stopped him. Let me do it. Zhai Yin took a breath, her tone as cold as usual. I've already tested it many times, there won't be a problem. Wang Ming really wanted to refuse, but his attitude wasn't as resolute as before, and he did his best to speak in a calm tone. Last time, he had used the heavenly materials sword to brace himself to save that group of students in the hospital. Coupled with the excessive consumption from using the brain deduction technique, he had been in a coma for several days. Although he really didn't want to admit it, it was indeed Zhai Yin who had stayed by his side to take care of him during those few days. Wang Ming wasn't stupid, he naturally knew that Zhai Yin had designs on him. But he just couldn't figure out how he had provoked this female bodhisattva. No. Zhai Yin said resolutely. Even if it's just a tiny space crack, if anything happens, you'll be cut to pieces right away. Wang Ming, you're exaggerating. Zhai Yin folded her arms and looked at Wang Ming. Either you listen to me, or you stop the experiment. Wang Ming couldn't be bothered to argue any further, and directly chose to give up. Fine. I'll listen to you, big sister. After saying that, he handed the tattered Daoist robe to Zhai Yin. Zhai Yin took it with great satisfaction, and then went to operate the machine with ease. On the side, the young man in white was shocked when he heard this. Big sister. Wang Ming nodded and pointed at Zhai Yin's back. That's right, this person who looks like a man is actually a big sister. Are you shocked? This big sister is a rare gem in our country's gender identification field. Hearing this, the corners of Jia Yin's mouth twitched. Grenade-throwing senior immortal whispered in Wang Ming's ear, then, Brother Wang Ming, what's your relationship? Relationship? Wang Ming couldn't help laughing. Of course we're brothers. Hearing Wang Ming's words, Jia Yin couldn't help trembling. Chapter 435. It wasn't that Grenade-throwing senior immortal had heard of Wang Ming, but this was his first time meeting him. He had heard Wang Ling mention Wang Ming several times when they were chatting. And each time, there was an indescribable resentment in it. It was an indescribable feeling of love and hate. To be honest, Grenade-throwing senior immortal felt that Jia Yin was exaggerating a little. This was Brother Ling's cousin. Even if his cultivation wasn't as good as Brother Ling's, how bad could it be? Grenade-throwing senior immortal also hadn't sensed any aura from Wang Ming, but he felt that anyone who was related to Brother Ling definitely wasn't simple. Thinking about all the great seniors in the Wang family's small villa, even a single broccoli contained the most profound knowledge of heavenly Tao. To put it bluntly, they were all people who had cultivated for thousands of years. They had to have some sort of mental understanding of whether they had strength or not. Thus, Grenade-throwing senior immortal was a little displeased with Jia Yin's attitude. But he couldn't say anything, because he felt that these two people's current state was very much like the kind of couple who were flirting. Standing behind Wang Ming in the research institute, Grenade-throwing senior immortal deeply felt that there was an indescribable azure field between the two of them. It was very terrifying. Grenade-throwing senior immortal didn't even dare speak. He was actually a little afraid that a fourth person would suddenly jump out at this moment and yell something like, "I was clearly here first." But Wang Ming and Jia Yin were already used to this kind of situation. Considering Grenade-throwing senior immortal's presence, in the end, Wang Ming chose to alleviate this seemingly awkward atmosphere for the first time. He explained the procedure for the space assessment. There's no need to doubt the performance of this instrument, I've tested it many times. Do you see that fine, gossamer lead on the outside of the glass cover? I've defined this lead as a dimensional line. As long as we connect this dimensional line to the object being appraised, we'll be able to roughly determine the relevant data of this Taoist robe, including the remnant sword qi on it. We'll be able to precisely find the relevant dimensional coordinates. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at this scene with a slightly amazed expression. It wasn't that he hadn't heard of space tracking technology, but he had thought that it would probably be 100 years before it could be realized. But Wang Ming's strength was beyond his imagination. In theory, Wang Ming had already developed a prototype for a scientific instrument that could only be invented several hundred years later. Although there were indeed some shortcomings in the time it took for the machine to start up, this small flaw still couldn't overshadow Wang Ming's groundbreaking research in this field. On the other side, Wang Ling had finished reviewing all his homework for the current stage. Including the time he had spent scrolling through the news on his wristwatch, it took him less than 10 minutes to memorize all the important revision points for the midterm exam that Teacher Pan had talked about in class today. No matter what, learning was always the most important thing. There were even times when, in his eyes, even the monthly test was much more important than the 3,000 great spells. The reason was simple, this was because humans treasured the things that they had fought hard for. For Wang Ling, the 3,000 great Tao had been formed as his brain cells grew from a young age. The time he truly spent on cultivation was perhaps even less than the monthly exams. Putting down the revision materials in his hand, Wang Ling took a look at the messages. Whether it was the private chat window or the chat group, they were all empty. After all, it had been many years since Daoist Guang's tattered Daoist robe had been used. Wang Ling felt that it wouldn't be an easy task to rely on the wisps of sword qi left on the Daoist robe to track the corresponding space coordinates using a scientific instrument. But Wang Ling was very confident in this matter, because he knew that Wang Ming had already developed a relevant instrument to measure space. Perhaps this instrument wasn't in its perfect state, and was just a prototype. But Wang Ling believed that in today's world, if even Wang Ming couldn't do it, no one else would be able to. After finishing his homework, Old Man Wang called Wang Ling downstairs. Old Man Wang and Jiang Haifu, the head of Kitchen Knife sect, who was also Wang Ling's grade classmate Jiang Bai's father, had previously arranged to have a cooking competition. Seeing that the appointed date was approaching, the old man had been working very hard these days to come up with a lot of new dishes, intending to show them off in front of Jiang Bai's father. Thus, Wang Ling had been summoned to try out the latest dishes. And this time, the old man had invented 2 brand new dishes. The old man was actually a very competitive person, especially when he was young. As long as it was a cooking competition, he would strive to be the champion. Now that he had lived for more than half his life, he had never failed in any cooking competition he had participated in so far. At the old man's insistent request, Wang Ling, Father Wang, Mother Wang and Loopy Toad were all called together. This Jiang Haifu is the head of Kitchen Knife sect and one of the biggest leaders in the food and beverage industry today. Kikaro restaurant is his family's business. Can you do it, Dad? Father Wang sat obediently at the dining table as he weakly voiced his doubts. He had been happily battling the troll just now and had sent his greetings to the troll's entire family. He had been planning to send his greetings to all 18 generations of his ancestors, but hadn't expected the old man to drag him downstairs. The old man held the iron ladle in his hand and knocked on the table forcefully. What's wrong? Are you looking down on me, an old employee of Kikaro Restaurant? In any case, I've been the head chef of Kikaro Restaurant's flagship store for more than 30 years, and I invented many of their dishes. Father Wang was speechless. Then, at the dining table, everyone saw the old man lift the lid off the first dish. This was a pot of very thick broth. The broth looked very clear and overflowed with spirit power, which made people feel relaxed and happy just by smelling it. Father Wang couldn't wait to scoop up a spoonful of broth and drink it. In an instant, he actually felt his exhaustion sweep away. What kind of broth is this, Dad? Father Wang looked at the old man and felt that it was very magical. The old man pinched his beard and said with a smile, when dealing with extraordinary people, you naturally have to use extraordinary methods. You think this is just a pot of meat, but the meat inside is actually the internal organs of a spirit monkey. I was looking for this ingredient before, and I never thought that I would really find it through my friend. Listening, Mother Wang also took a sip of the broth and was full of praise. It's really delicious. Amazing, amazing. Father Wang couldn't help giving him a thumbs up. Then, Dad, how did you get the inspiration for these dishes? The old man looked at Father Wang. Cooking is actually the same as writing, it comes from life. 2 days ago, wasn't there a live streamer called Baboon who was banned? That was actually where I got the inspiration for this dish. I named it Baboon Head Soup. Wang Ling, Father Wang, then the inspiration for the second dish, Old Man Wang. The first dish was inspired by the legal system show PlayerUnknown's Battleground, Rise of the Baboon. The second dish was inspired by the second episode of this legal system show PlayerUnknown's Battleground, Hit the Snake 7 Inches Deep. Father Wang and Mother Wang, Old Man Wang, so I named the second dish Snakeskin Soup. Chapter 436. Space assessment took some time, and after connecting the Daoist robe to the dimensional line, Shai-In separated it from the Daoist robe after about 10 minutes, and returned the tattered robe to Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Because he had always thought that Shai-In was a man, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wasn't used to changing the way he addressed her. Brother Shai-In, Shai-In stared at him, and the young man in white couldn't help wiping his sweat with the tattered Daoist robe. Well, Miss Shai-In, what's the assessment result? Shai-In replied indifferently, the dimensional line has already extracted the residual sword chi data from the Daoist robe, but it still needs time. The assessment report will come out in 24 hours. She stared at grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. You can leave today. I'll let you know if there's anything. On the side, Wang Ming frowned and couldn't help muttering, 24 hours. That long? That can't be. Jia Yin's gaze froze. I said 24 hours, so it's 24 hours. If you say any more nonsense, I'll smash this machine. The corner of Wang Ming's mouth twitched. Did you take the wrong medicine? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. For some reason, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sensed a very strange azure field from these two people, but the young man in white could actually sense it, and could more or less guess why this Miss Jia Yin was so furious. At this time, there was no one else in the research institute except for Wang Ming and Jia Yin. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal seemed to have heard Wang Ming mention it before. This week, all the experts in the research institute except for him had been sent out to investigate, and it would take them 2 or 3 days to return. So, there was only one truth. He had become a third wheel. As great death-courting senior in the cultivation circle, the reason why he was so sought after by so many people wasn't just because of his chivalrous sense of justice, but also because of his EQ. Even in modern cultivation society, people without EQ couldn't survive. In this circle, it was very important to learn how to read a person's words from their body language. Looking at the look in their eyes, one could tell that there was definitely something going on between these two people. RBQ, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who was certain that he had disturbed their good time, could only laugh bitterly. Then, Brother Wang Ming, I'll take my leave first today and wait for your news. Wang Ming, is that okay? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal shook his head. It's fine, it's fine. Brother Wang Ming and Miss Jia Yin are more important? Wang Ming, aw. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal patted Wang Ming on the shoulder with an expression that said he had already seen through everything. I won't bother you any longer, but when Brother Wang Ming is doing something, it's best if you pay more attention, Wang Ming. Speaking up to this point, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal pulled Wang Ming to one side and said in a very low voice, I have a friend who didn't control his strength when he was doing something, and directly caused a magnitude 10 earthquake. Given Brother Wang Ming's realm, you'd better be careful when you're playing at the Research Institute. Wang Ming, Jia Yin, standing at the entrance to the Research Institute, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help heaving a long sigh of relief. Back then, at the Wang family's small villa, old Senior Wang had put a broccoli in grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's bowl. Back then, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had already analyzed old Senior Wang's expression and noticed that there was something unusual about that broccoli. And this time, he analyzed the unspeakable secret between the two of them with just one look. Oh my God! As expected, he was a little genius. At the same time, in another unknown space, this was a dark gray world. Even the clouds were dark gray, and it reeked of darkness. A young man with long black hair sat upright on a huge black boulder on the top of a craggy mountain. The corners of his eyes were heavily painted with eyeshadow, and the evil blue patterns on his face were extremely sinister, extending from his cheeks to the back of his neck. His style was full of evil. Immortal Jin Yuan, you can't fool me. The entrance to the treasure house is here. I also know that you're here. What? Are you not willing to come out and meet this junior? The evil young man closed his eyes and sneered. His voice wasn't loud, but it was extremely penetrating, and the whole world was filled with the echo of the young man's voice. This was a powerful sound wave spell. Spirit power surged out, and anyone below the soul formation stage wouldn't be able to withstand it at all, and would directly explode and die. The young man knew that there were no living creatures in this space, but he still did it on purpose. This was a provocation. And most importantly, the young man felt that when he spoke, there would be an echo, which would give him a very cool feeling. He, evil sword god, was a grand almighty, and he had to speak with vigor. However, after a long time, there was no response. He was very sure that immortal Jinyuan was here. Even if he wasn't in this world, he was definitely monitoring this place. After about a minute, the young man felt spiritual pressure descend from the sky, which was accompanied by the power of a restriction. The young man sensed that his sound wave spell had been restricted. Immortal Jinyuan, do you think you can restrict my echo like this? Can you restrict my echo now? Are you restricting my echo? Are you controlling my echo? Did you hear my reply? Did you hear back? My echo, is it, immortal Jinyuan, about 5 minutes later. In the next moment, evil sword god opened his eyes and looked at the sky. He couldn't help sneering in his heart. In this world, there's actually a junior who dares to use sword chi to track me. What a joke. Ever since he had mastered the power of sword Dao, he could clearly sense the network of sword chi, and the enormous grid of sword chi was as clear as a spider's web in his mind. Sword, come! Evil sword god roared in his heart. With a wave of his hand, there was a hum as countless particles of light converged in the air to form a purple-black spirit sword in his hand, the number 1 sword on the spirit sword power ranking list, Heaven Cleaving. Holding Heaven Cleaving in his hand, evil sword god lightly slashed the air. Spirit power howled in the chaotic space, and a crack suddenly appeared. This was a space fissure which evil sword god had forcibly opened up with the power of sword Dao. He used it as a portal. As long as he had been to a place, he could use sword chi to split open a gap and come and go as he pleased. Evil sword god raised his head and laughed into the air. Immortal Jinyuan, after I've dealt with this rude junior, I'll come back for you. This junior will 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 come back for you. You. After saying that, evil sword god raised his sword and stepped into the air fissure. Chapter 437. After leaving the research institute, grenade-throwing senior immortal tossed the spirit sword on his back aside and chose to fly it home. The sword on grenade-throwing senior immortal's back was called Brilliant Victory, which clearly meant ever victorious and brilliant. This sword hadn't been made by Fatty Luo, but had been passed down from grenade-throwing senior immortal's ancestors. It was usually in a sealed state with layers of seals wrapped around it like a rice dumpling, but it actually didn't affect its ability to fly a sword. At most, it looked a little worse for wear. Another pain in the ass point was that this spirit sword had been forged by a weaponsmithing master from out of town, so when grenade-throwing senior immortal had obtained it back then, the sword plate number of this spirit sword was from out of town. During the morning and evening rush hours, there was a flight restriction. But the timing was just right. If he took a spirit bus back, it would take up a lot of time. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had just jumped onto the spirit sword and was about to set off when he received a phone call. He looked at the caller ID, Cheat Master Reed. He hadn't typed it wrong, Was it Cheat Master Reed? Grenade-throwing senior immortal stared blankly at the screen. After touring Immortal Toya's Chrysanthemum Island, he had privately looked for this fortune-teller friend of his, Daoist Reed. People had given him the nickname Cheat Reed Master because his divination was as accurate as a cheat. Like Fatty Luo, this person wasn't in the chat group, but he was very good friends with grenade-throwing senior immortal. No matter what era it was, there were always mavericks. There were too many eccentrics in the cultivation circle to count. Some people didn't join the group, so there was no point in pulling them in. In the end, it was up to the individual. Who knew if one day they would feel lonely like Daoist Guang and want to join the group to chat every day? Grenade-throwing senior immortal pressed the answer button. On the other end of the line came Cheat Master Reed's voice with a slight local accent. Hey! Fungus! Likely. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, Brother Reed, like me. As soon as he said this, the young man in white couldn't help stamping his foot. Every time he spoke to cheat Master Reed, his accent would slip. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal composed himself and asked, "Brother Lou, is there any news about the divination I asked you to do?" After leaving Chrysanthemum Island, he had looked for cheat Master Reed with the intention of telling Immortal Toya's marriage fortune. However, marriage divination was what Daoist Reed hated the most. Not only did it take a long time to complete, but every person who asked for a marriage divination would also develop a kind of overconfidence after learning about the direction of their own marriage fate. So why were there so many straight men and straight women nowadays? Daoist Reed felt that he was partly to blame. Thus, if one were to ask Daoist Reed for a marriage divination, unless they were very good friends, they wouldn't accept this type of divination no matter how much money they were offered. Daoist Reed said, "Marriage divination. I'll have to wait for a while. It's not easy to do, but once it's done, it'll definitely be accurate." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, "Then why did Brother Lou look for me today?" Daoist Reed, "Fungus, do you still remember the first few times you asked me to kill you? You gave me the 8 characters of your birth." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal nodded. That seems to be the case, but even so, it had been a long time, at least several hundred years. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal remembered that he had left the 8 characters of his birth for the sake of fortune-telling. Daoist Reed, on the other hand, had the habit of storing the information of his frequent customers for future use. Daoist Reed, "Last time, before I was helping Fungus's friend with his divination, I took the wrong 8 characters of his birth, and accidentally took them to be Fungus's. When I was done, I realized that something was wrong." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal frowned slightly. Took the wrong one. This was a fairly low-level mistake, and it was basically impossible for an experienced fortune-teller like Daoist Reed to make a mistake. Generally speaking, this kind of unintentional misreading of the 8 characters was usually a sign of something. Daoist Reed's thoughts were almost the same as Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's. "I felt that this mistake might be some kind of sign, so I helped Fungus with his divination first. And the result? According to the divination, Fungus might be in for a bloody calamity, great misfortune." Wrong. It seems extremely ominous. It seems to be an ominous divination of life and death. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal broke out in a sweat. "You didn't make a mistake, did you?" On the other end of the phone, Daoist Reed shook his head. "It can't be wrong, I did it 3 times. Originally, I had my suspicions that there might be a problem somewhere. Previously, I had helped Fungus Garlic calculate its fortune. Fungus Garlic would be blessed with the light of fortune for the next 1,000 years. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be too likely for such an inauspicious divination to appear. Furthermore, when I did the divination for the 2nd and 3rd times, I even used the Imperial Garlic Divining Magic artifact." Daoist Reed was very confident in the accuracy of his divination. "This Garlic Divining Magic artifact is amazing. So far, I've never failed with this magic artifact. What kind of magic artifact is it?" "It's a magic sword called the Fortune Avoidance Sword. This sword can predict misfortune, but not fortune. If the divination is steady and auspicious, the magic sword won't move at all. The more ominous the divination, the more the sword will tremble. When I tested it on Fungus today, it was like a vibrator with the highest gear on." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, "Then, Brother Reed, do you have a way to break it?" Daoist Reed sighed and looked a little embarrassed. "If it's very ominous, I have a way. As for extremely ominous." "Fungus, brother, there's something I don't know if I should say." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, "Brother Reed, please speak your mind." Daoist Reed, "Fungus, please pay me for the garlic divination right away." "You can go in peace, Empress Lawn. I'm afraid if you delay any longer, I won't be able to receive it." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, after the call ended, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal stared at the screen and sank into deep thought for a long time, To be honest, it wasn't that he didn't know what extremely ominous meant, this was a divination of imminent disaster. Generally speaking, this kind of divination was no different from receiving a notice of critical illness in the hospital, but no matter how he thought about it, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't understand why he was suddenly facing imminent disaster. No, if that was the case, he couldn't go back yet. Once an extremely ominous divination was divined, it would come true within 24 hours. Furthermore, the ominous scent would spread to the surroundings. If he went home at this time, even little Silver might be implicated. What should he do? Should he go look for Brother Ling? Just as he was about to make a call, there was a whoosh. At that moment, a streak of sword chi actually attacked him from afar. This sword chi was a warning, and it brushed past grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's ear at an extremely fast speed as it swept away a few strands of his black hair. Who was it? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal looked in the direction the sword chi had come from. In the moonlight, he saw a very evil-looking young man standing on a high street lamp and staring at him with a dark expression on his face. The young man sneered and said indifferently, "I am evil sword god, god. Chapter 438. Under the street lamp, that very evil young man introduced himself in a very Chuyuni tone. When grenade-throwing Senior Immortal heard this, he couldn't help blurting out, "Psycho." There was something very wrong with this guy. Maybe he was a mental patient who had escaped from some mental hospital? The true monarch's mind was filled with endless wild and fanciful thoughts. He didn't dare to let his guard down, because even though the young man maintained a distance of 30 meters from him, the evil aura made him instinctively feel a sense of oppression. The young man in white subconsciously gripped the brilliant victory sword, and realized that his hand was actually trembling. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help breaking out in a cold sweat on his cheeks. This was the first time he had ever trembled from the depths of his soul. Letting a patient with a mental illness like this run around on the streets was bound to cause a riot. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal felt that perhaps he should take this person back to the hospital. But very quickly, he changed his mind and suddenly recalled the Taoist name this evil young man had used to introduce himself. Evil sword god, holy shit. This guy is evil sword god. Because of the evil young man's convulsive self-introduction, it took grenade-throwing Senior Immortal a long time to react before he realized what was going on. But why had evil sword god suddenly appeared here? Gritting his teeth, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal raised his head again to look at the street lamp where evil sword god had been standing, but he had already disappeared. In the next moment, a hand was already on his shoulder, and a voice filled with fear from the depths of his soul rang out. "Looking for me?" This speed. Was this a teleportation spell? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal turned his head in bewilderment, and only saw half of this evil young man's sinister smile. "Bold Junior, you dare trace my sword chi in reverse to try and find me? I'll take off half your shoulder first." In the next moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal felt immense pressure on his right shoulder as a ball of demonic energy condensed in evil sword god's hand. At the same time, that voice rang out in grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's mind. "This ball of spirit power contains the sword Dao Chi of my heaven-cleaving sword, and can cause permanent damage to anyone below itinerant immortal level. Even godly medicine won't help." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud bang, and the ball of spiritual energy mixed with the evil sword energy exploded. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was directly sent flying several thousand meters before he landed on the ground and stopped the violent impact. There was no blood as expected. The ball of spiritual energy only blasted a hole in the robe of the white-clothed youth. Evil sword god stared at this scene from a distance. The situation was a little unexpected. That was close. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal broke out in a cold sweat. His white Taoist robe had already been blown to shreds. This was Anima's latest high-class product. Because it was too expensive, he only bought 2 in total and planned to change them on a daily basis. In the end, one of them was scrapped. There was a basketball-sized hole in his white Daoist robe on his shoulder, revealing the long johns that Mother Wang had given him earlier. It was obvious that Wang Ling had also enchanted these long johns. If it hadn't been for the power of the long johns, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was well aware that he wouldn't have been able to withstand such explosive damage at all. At that moment, the young man in white already had a theory as to why Evil Sword God had been looking for him. Since they could use the Daoist robe that Taoist Guang had left behind to track Evil Sword God using the sword chi left on it, Evil Sword God could naturally also use the sword chi left on it to find this place. Previously, the Daoist robe had been sealed, and Evil Sword God had thought that Taoist Guang was already dead, so he hadn't followed them. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal hadn't expected that Evil Sword God would actually be alerted by the reverse-tracking sword chi this time. In the end, he had been careless. Evil Sword God had already mastered the power of Sword Dao, one of the 3,000 great spells, and had become extremely sensitive to Sword Dao. He could even clearly sense something as intangible as sword chi. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal thought about it carefully. It seemed that he had used that tattered Daoist robe to wipe his sweat at the research institute just now. It was likely that the sword chi left on it had stained his body at that time. One misstep, and a lifetime of regret. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was filled with remorse. He knew that he was already powerless to resist the current situation, and could only think of a way to find Wang Ling first. Thinking this, he immediately stepped on the Brilliant Victory sword in his hand, and then swiftly soared into the sky in the direction of the Wang family's villa. Evil Sword God was too powerful. When he stepped on the spirit sword just now, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that all the electronic equipment on him had already been destroyed by the other party's overflowing sword chi. Not only that, when Evil Sword God had pressed down on his shoulder just now, the moment the psionic power was released, all the streetlights on the road were instantly extinguished, and everything became pitch black. All the electronic devices in the area, including the cars that were moving, stopped working in an instant. They were all destroyed by the evil sword chi. In the darkness, Evil Sword God opened his eyes, which emitted a faint purple light and gave off a very demonic feeling. A little interesting. Evil Sword God sneered. He hadn't expected his move just now to actually not cause any damage to the young man, which proved that the defensive equipment under the young man's Daoist robe wasn't of a low grade. Looking in the direction in which Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had fled, Evil Sword God's eyes focused on the spirit sword which Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was standing on. Although the sword was wrapped in layers of seals, it gave him a very familiar feeling. Back then, his Shizhuan Fan Rui, whose Daoist name was Heavenly Sword Immortal, had been famous for thousands of years on Sword Dao because of his two-handed swordsmanship. And both swords which were hailed as the two great godly swords were in the hands of Heavenly Sword Immortal Fan Rui. One was called Heaven Cleaving, which was number 1 on the list of swords in power, and the one which Evil Sword God had now seized. The other was called Brilliant Victory, which was number 1 on the list of swords in defense, and had an extremely powerful parrying ability and defensive attribute. Back then, after he had killed his Shifu and snatched Heaven Cleaving from him, he had been looking for the whereabouts of Brilliant Victory all this time. Even though Brilliant Victory's aura was wrapped in layers of seals, he had still been able to smell its fragrance when he had gotten close. There's no mistaking it, Evil Sword God stuck out his long, pointed tongue and licked his lips. He had initially just wanted to teach a lesson to this junior who had dared to follow his sword chi and track his aura. He hadn't expected to accidentally learn of Brilliant Victory's whereabouts. But, why was Brilliant Victory in this person's hands? Evil Sword God laughed evilly. Forget it, let's catch this person first. Chapter 439. It would take less than a quarter of an hour to fly at top speed to the Wang family's villa in a straight line. But Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't choose this direct route now. Considering Evil Sword God's ferocious nature, he didn't want to involve innocent passers-by. Thus, he steered the brilliant victory sword and took a detour to a sparsely populated area. But this way, it would take him 40 minutes to reach the Wong family's villa. Whether he lived or died today would all depend on these 40 minutes. At that moment, grenade-throwing senior immortal just hoped that no traffic police would stop him. He was already speeding while flying the sword at top speed. It was a small matter if the traffic police stopped him and deducted points or fined him or revoked his driving license, but if evil sword god interfered, more innocent people would suffer. From beginning to end, evil sword god didn't move. The evil purple light in his eyes lit up. He named this move looking at the horizon with one eye, and it was also one of the purple investigative demon eyes techniques. Back then, after personally killing his Shifu, his second stop had been the Tang sect, which his Shifu had been on good terms with. He had found Tang Shizhou, the current 19th generation sect leader's disciple, and taken off his pair of purple investigative demon eyes to install them in his own eyes. With this pair of demon eyes in hand and the eye technique looking at the horizon with one eye, his eyes could track very far away. Want to go somewhere with fewer people? Not a bad idea. Unfortunately, it's no use. Evil sword god sneered in his heart. Standing on the spot with one hand behind his back, he waved his hand and slashed down with his sword in the air. Interesting guy. But in my eyes, you're still just a miscellaneous cultivator, a space fisher opened. After calculating grenade-throwing senior immortal's escape route, evil sword god stepped into it and disappeared. Flying through the air, grenade-throwing senior immortal instantly felt nervous. He thought he had already escaped far enough, but the pressure from evil sword god had never disappeared. He could feel a pair of eyes staring at him from behind. I have to hold on. I have to get to Brother Ling. Grenade-throwing senior immortal gritted his teeth, turned around, and threw out several black grenades in a row as he recited a spell. Enhanced Sky Bomb Grenade. In an instant, there was the sound of explosions, and in the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with smoke and fog for thousands of miles. Boom boom boom, this enhanced version of sky-piercing thunder was deafening, and the fog it emitted was not ordinary either. There was a fog that could temporarily blind people. When evil sword god tore open a space fissure and walked out, he immediately found himself wrapped in fog. Sky-shattering thunder. Evil sword god snorted coldly. He didn't make any big movements, but his purple investigative demon eyes circulated again and he roared savagely, Junior. What can a mere blinding fog do to me? What can you do to me? Why should I? Ho! In the next moment, two beams of light shot out from the purple investigative demon eye like demonic dragons. It directly pierced through the dense fog for thousands of miles. Hoo-hoo! Two sounds. The demon dragon released from the purple investigative demon eye charged through the fog and scattered the smoke for thousands of miles. Grenade-throwing senior immortal was startled by this scene. His sky-shattering thunder was an ancestral hidden weapon. Back then, his ancestor's godfather had been a descendant of the Tang sect, and had specially modified it. An ordinary sky-shattering thunder was enough to contend with a perfected person, but this enhanced version could even stall a true immortal in pursuit. At the very least, it should be able to stall for time for a while. He had already used up all 4 of the enhanced version of sky-shattering thunder he had on him. But this evil sword god was actually able to deal with it so easily and directly ignore the dense fog for thousands of miles. Combined with the troublesome power of Sword Dao, grenade-throwing senior immortal judged that evil sword god's overall combat strength had already surpassed that of a true immortal. He was probably already infinitely close to the level of a venerated immortal. As he fled, grenade-throwing senior immortal was already sweating profusely. He sighed inwardly and felt a trace of despair. Was this the despair of an extremely inauspicious divination? Indeed, since ancient times, he seemed to have never heard of a case where a person who had been divined by an extremely ominous divination could successfully escape. The young man in white stopped fleeing and looked in the direction of the Wong family's small villa. He was now halfway to the Wong family's small villa. It was definitely too late for him to escape. Evil Sword God had already caught up behind him. Pointing his sword at grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, he couldn't help sneering. "Mongrel cultivator. Have you already given up?" In the air, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal turned around, his body trembling uncontrollably. The gap in realms was really too big. Anyone else wouldn't be able to bear it. The fact that he was able to stand in the air without collapsing was entirely due to the long johns he was wearing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to talk to Evil Sword God on the same plane. If it had been anyone else at the same realm, they probably wouldn't even have been able to straighten their legs under such powerful spiritual pressure. This junior has long heard of Lord Evil Sword God's might. Today, this junior humbly admits defeat. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal cupped his fists in a salute. "Little junior. There's no use stalling for time. My venerable self has never successfully escaped from anyone I want to kill." Evil Sword God pointed his sword at him, and the demonic and overbearing sword chi on the blade vibrated in the air. "Mongrel cultivator. My venerable self wants to ask you, what on earth is this armor you're wearing? If you tell me the truth, my venerable self can let you die a little more painlessly." "This person's name is Wong Ling," grenade-throwing Senior Immortal replied. "The armor I'm wearing was made by him. The two of them aren't far away. If Senior Evil Sword God is willing to shout for him, he'll definitely hear you." At this point, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal knew that it was already impossible for him to escape, but he still clung to one last glimmer of hope. "How about you shout for him?" After staring blankly for a moment, Evil Sword God couldn't stop laughing wildly. "In the end, you're just a mongrel cultivator. You actually sold out your friends so easily. Don't worry, my venerable self will definitely shout for him." He could tell that grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wasn't lying. His purple investigative demon eyes could detect minute expressions on a person's face, and he would immediately be able to tell if someone was lying. He raised his sword and pointed it at grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. "Don't worry. Once my venerable self exterminates you, your friend will come down to accompany you very soon." As he said this, Evil Sword God raised his hand, and the heaven-cleaving sword flew out. As it swung out, the space around it cracked inch by inch. Was it over? In the last moment of his life, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's mind was exceptionally calm. Under the ferocious sword light, his vision was filled with hallucinations. It seemed like he was seeing Wong Ling. He couldn't block it at all. He couldn't even see the shadow of the heaven-cleaving sword clearly. In the next moment, his entire body was instantly pierced by the heaven-cleaving sword, and the power of Sword Tao exploded in his body as he turned into a bloody mist. TCH. "In the end, you're just a mongrel cultivator. You can't even withstand a single blow." Evil Sword God sneered. He stretched out his hand to grab the brilliant victory sword, then roared wildly as he directly used the 10,000-li telepathy spell to shout wildly in the air. "Wong Ling. Where is mongrel cultivator Wong Ling? Mongrel cultivator Wong Ling. Come out and die. Come out and die. Come out and die. Come out and die." However, the echo came to an abrupt end. Because in the next moment, Evil Sword God saw a youngster appear in the air opposite him at some point. Without saying a word, this youngster's figure moved, and he instantly appeared in front of Evil Sword God, face to face. Evil Sword God finally broke out in a cold sweat. He realized that his purple investigative demon eyes couldn't catch him at all. Evil Sword God stared at him. "You're a mongrel." Before he could finish speaking, Wong Ling had already slapped him. Evil Sword God sneered. "Humph. Insignificant skill." He stretched out his arm to fend it off. However, in the next moment, there was the sound of arm bones breaking. This slap landed accurately on Evil Sword God's face. Evil Sword God screamed as he felt an incredible pain in his face. Blood flew out of his nose, his teeth flew out, and his eyes widened in terror. He directly turned into a meteor as he was smashed into the ground from 10,000 meters in the air. Chapter 440. Evil Sword God was directly smashed into the ground. In that instant, one could only think of the phrase, 3 inches into the ground. Wang Ling stared at the human-shaped dent in the ground, smoke still rising from his palm. Actually, when Wang Ling had been at home earlier, he had already sensed a trace of unease, but it was a pity that he had still been a step too late. This slap was a lesson for Evil Sword God's arrogance, and he hadn't used his full strength. Because Wang Ling felt that if he could free this devil with just one slap, it would really be too easy on him, Wang Ling floated in the air. In order to prevent others from getting involved in this fight, when he had smacked Evil Sword God, the intrinsic spirit field had already covered the area to form an independent space that was separated from the real world. Evil Sword God crawled out of the pit with a swollen face, which twitched slightly. Apart from anger, he was more shocked. He stared at Wang Ling, itinerant immortal. No, he was definitely stronger than an itinerant immortal. But judging from his realm and aura alone, the youngster in front of him was indeed an itinerant immortal. But it really didn't make sense for a mere itinerant immortal to be able to beat him like this with one slap. Evil Sword God raised his eyes and reached out to touch his cheek. A purple spirit light lit up in his hand, and the swelling on his face almost instantly healed. Jumping out of the pit, he looked around and realized that the scene in front of him had already changed. Thanks to his purple investigative demon eyes, he was well aware that this wasn't an illusion, but a real scene. In front of him, that old stone statue, those dozen or so palm trees that were still standing despite being in their twilight years, and the school building behind them that looked like it had been renovated many times, everything was undoubtedly real. And at that moment, the youngster who had smacked him to the ground with one slap was now looking down at him from the old stone statue. Instant release of the intrinsic spirit field. Evil Sword God's eyes darkened as he thought that this miscellaneous cultivator young man was indeed not simple. He was able to display formidable strength beyond his realm, and this intrinsic spirit field, which originally could only be used at the true immortal level, could be instantly released. All of this was a clear indication of this youngster's extraordinary strength. Was I careless? Thinking this, Evil Sword God clutched his stomach and started to laugh like he had lost his mind. So many years had passed. It had been too long since he had tasted pain. Wang Ling's slap had woken him up, and also made him feel a kind of evil nature that had fused with his blood continuously churn all over his body. Mongrel cultivator, you did well. You've successfully piqued my interest. The junior that I killed earlier actually dared to use his sword chi to track me. I thought it was a kind of provocation. Evil Sword God held Brilliant Victory in his left hand and Heaven Cleaving in his right. He then raised his right arm and pointed the blade at Wang Ling. Since you're his friend, you should also be punished for his disrespect to me. Not just you. Wait until I cut you into 8 pieces, then I'll grab your soul. I'll kill your family and friends one by one. Hearing this, Wang Ling took a deep breath. Saying this, Evil Sword God looked around contemptuously and snorted. Humph. It's just an intrinsic spirit field, what can it do to me? Evil Sword God was very confident. He was sure that he had been careless earlier, because he hadn't used any defensive means at the time, and had only used his physical body to block the attack. In the end, he had been careless and suffered a great loss. Now that he was serious, Evil Sword God felt his evil nature surge. Wang Ling's slap had stimulated his fighting spirit. Not only that, he had now gathered Heaven Cleaving and Brilliant Victory, which could be said to be a combination of offensive and defensive spirit swords on the spirit sword list, which made his battle strength even more formidable than before. Mongrel Cultivator. From the moment my venerable self seized this brilliant victory sword, the game was already over. In the next moment, Evil Sword God attacked again. Mongrel Cultivator, die. He flashed across the ground like a bolt of lightning. Even in Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field, his movements were still very swift and fierce. Holding two swords in his hands, he advanced toward the old stone statue where Wang Ling was standing as he split into many clones that were dazzling and too much for the eye to take in. Looking at this scene, Wang Ling sighed in his heart. He didn't quite understand why people nowadays like to perform acrobatics in battle the higher their realms were. Not only did this kind of flashy attack give people headaches, but in Wang Ling's view, it actually didn't have a crucial effect on the final outcome of the battle. So, wasn't it better to be simpler? Watching Evil Sword God charge at him and split into more and more clones, Wang Ling's gaze was focused on the one and only main body. Then, he raised his hand, ready to deliver a second slap. Evil Sword God's main body was getting closer and closer. In the next moment, a figure appeared in front of Wang Ling. But Wang Ling ignored him. His face was indifferent and expressionless. Go to hell. Mongrel Cultivator. At that moment, Evil Sword God's main body appeared behind him. On the old stone statue, Wang Ling spun around, boom. Like playing golf, a second slap landed precisely on Evil Sword God's face. That enormous force came crashing down with almost crushing force, and half of Evil Sword God's face directly caved in. Evil Sword God was sent flying by Wang Ling once again. A different beginning, but the same ending. History was always strikingly similar. Inside the intrinsic spirit field, Evil Sword God had already smashed through the teaching building. Wang Ling's slap directly sent Evil Sword God flying into the main building, passing through several classrooms and even the toilet in passing. When he finally flew out, he was still carrying the toilet's water tank on his head. Wang Ling gazed at him with a relaxed expression. With a wave of his hand, he casually used the gravitational spell to grab the two swords next to Evil Sword God. How is this possible? His face covered in blood, Evil Sword God crawled up from the sports field and spat out a mouthful of blood. He had been completely beaten senseless. At the same time, Wang Ling turned to look at another spot in the sky. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, who had been turned into a bloody mist by the power of Sword Dao earlier, had already reformed, and even his long johns and white Daoist robe had been perfectly restored. With the special effect of the soul suppression ring, he had been directly resurrected on the spot without a single mistake. When Wang Ling had arrived earlier, he had already sensed that grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't really died, because he could sense that the spirit sword contract between the brilliant victory sword and grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't been broken. Of the 10 soul suppression rings which he had refined using the great weapon refining spell and the 8 classes of divine weapons, the rest were average 3rd class holy weapons, and grenade-throwing senior immortal's ring was the most special one. Apart from being able to hold a soul space, the most important ability of the soul suppression ring was to protect the soul and prevent it from dispersing. After 2 minutes, the soul could be used as a foundation to reform a physical body for resurrection. This was a genuine resurrection ring. The only difference was that other people's 3rd-class soul suppression rings could only resurrect them twice at most. The one in grenade-throwing senior immortal's hand was a world-defying ring, as long as the ring wasn't destroyed. In theory, it could be done. Chapter 441. Time returned to the moment when grenade-throwing senior immortal was pierced by the heaven-cleaving sword infused with the power of Sword Dao, and completely exploded into a bloody mist. In that instant, grenade-throwing senior immortal thought that it would be very painful, but the truth was that he actually didn't feel any pain at all. His body had already completely collapsed as the power of Sword Dao pierced through all his tendons and meridians. There wasn't even any flesh left as he disintegrated into a bloody mist. However, grenade-throwing senior immortal realized that his soul had actually been preserved in perfect condition. In his soul state, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that he was just an incorporeal body. He floated in the air, but the scene in front of him was still vivid in his mind. After Evil Sword God had roared a few times, Wang Ling had instantly appeared and directly slapped Evil Sword God so hard that he couldn't take care of himself. Too strong. Sure enough, Brother Ling's strength was even more terrifying than he had imagined. But, what was going on? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't understand it. Logically speaking, given the power of the heaven-cleaving sword, which could almost be called a divine sword, coupled with the power of Sword Dao, even a soul could be destroyed in an instant, let alone a physical body. But the result was contrary to Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's expectations. His soul was actually unscathed. A moment later, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that the bloody mist drifting in the air was actually condensing again, his meridians were regenerating bit by bit, and his physical body was reforming bit by bit. Just like the legendary Blood Escape spell, a brand new version of himself was formed. Not only that, even his clothes were reforming. A perfect resurrection. It wasn't until that moment that Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that the soul suppression ring on the ring finger of his left hand was surging with an enormous amount of spirit power. It was the spirit power produced by the special power of this magic ring that had protected his soul from being destroyed by the heaven-cleaving sword and allowed his physical body to continuously reform. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help sighing. If this extremely inauspicious calamity was his destiny, then this soul suppression ring had already successfully helped him get through it. A person didn't encounter an extremely inauspicious calamity many times in their lives, and the chances of turning it around were almost negligible. It was precisely because of this that Cheat Master Reed felt that he was completely hopeless after divining Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's calamity. It looked like he owed Brother Ling another huge favor. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help sighing in his heart as his body was completely reconstructed and resurrected. If it wasn't for this ring, it would have been difficult for him to survive this calamity. By the time he was resurrected, Evil Sword God had already been slapped a second time. He was sent flying by Wang Ling's slap and landed on the sports field. When he flew out of the school building, his head actually hit the water tank in the school toilet. Evil Sword God crawled up from the ground, his whole body trembling and even his knees shaking uncontrollably. He was frightened, but also angry. When had he, the 10-meter sword god, ever suffered such humiliation? After 2 consecutive palm strikes, not only did he not have the strength to fight back, even his 2 spirit swords had been snatched away by the other party. This was an absolute humiliation, and Evil Sword God felt embarrassed for the first time. His body trembled, and he gritted his teeth as he stubbornly stood up from the ground. His entire body was trembling, and blood flowed out from his 7 apertures. Dark red blood flowed out from the gaps between his teeth. Even his front teeth had disappeared. This young man was definitely not just a bodiless immortal. Evil Sword God was certain. To be able to injure him to this extent with just these 2 slaps, this person definitely wasn't an ordinary person. But he still refused to admit defeat. Since his debut, he, Evil Sword God, had caused fear in all walks of life, and no one he wanted to kill could escape his wrath. When had he ever been humiliated like this? However, when he saw Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who had already turned into a bloody mist in the air, reform his body and come back to life, a rare look of horror appeared on his face. This is impossible. How is this possible? Evil Sword God gnashed his teeth. Given the strength of that young man in white, there was absolutely no way he would have the strength to hide any means of resurrection. His heaven-cleaving sword contained the formidable power of Sword Dao, which was the heavenly Dao of the 3,000 great spells. When the power of heavenly Dao poured into one's body, it was almost no different from divine punishment. The moment it entered one's body, even one's soul would disintegrate completely, let alone one's body. This was a method that would leave one without a burial ground. Evil Sword God didn't know how many people he had killed with this method. As far as he knew, no one had survived. So, Who the hell knew what he had experienced today? Evil Sword God looked at Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who had been completely resurrected, and even his clothes had been completely restored, as if time had been reversed. At that moment, Evil Sword God's heart was filled with confidence. No matter what, my venerable self has to respond with my strongest means in this battle, and I can't hold anything back. Back then, Shifu's Sword Immortal Fan Rui chose senior brother Yi Jianchuan as his successor, and that was the beginning of all my resentment. All these years, my venerable self has painstakingly practiced sword skills and cultivated sword Dao. I don't think senior brother is my match anymore, but... Evil Sword God realized that at that moment, he was facing an even greater challenge than confronting his senior brother, General Yi Jianchuan. Back then, everything he had done had been purely to prove his strength. He had killed his Shifu and painstakingly practiced sword skills for the sake of one day being able to exterminate his senior brother, General Yi Jianchuan, with one sword strike. Today, however, he had clearly encountered an even greater opponent. Evil Sword God took a deep breath and calmed his mind down as quickly as possible. No matter what, he had to get serious. Evil Sword God got up. True immortal spirit power surged all over his body, and his wounds healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a lot of situations, especially in battle, when one side was at a disadvantage, many people would choose to take pills in order to fight a battle of attrition. But Evil Sword God was different, his pride wouldn't allow him to do so. When it came to Sword Dao, he thought that he was almost invincible, and that no one could beat him in Sword Dao. Sword Spirit Contract. He made a hand seal and forcibly activated the power of the contract. In an instant, the heaven-cleaving sword in Wang Ling's hand turned into particles of light and reappeared in Evil Sword God's hand. Although Wang Ling had seized both spirit swords, he hadn't erased the power of the contract on them, so Evil Sword God had an opportunity to take advantage of it. But it didn't matter anymore. Wang Ling could see that this Evil Sword God was confident in his Sword Dao. Since that was the case, he should use the same Sword Dao to fight back and completely destroy this kind of person's confidence. Brother Ling. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, what should we do now? Wang Ling stretched out his hand, and a space crack directly appeared in the air. Then, a peachwood spirit sword was directly pulled out of the crack. Without saying a word, Wang Ling directly threw Jinka into Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hands. The moment he caught Jinka, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hands trembled. Go cut him down. Wang Ling looked straight at Evil Sword God as he spoke telepathically to Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. There was no superfluous talk. Chapter 442. At this time, if someone asked Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, what on earth does it feel like to hold a big boss sword, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal would definitely be speechless. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal would definitely be speechless. In fact, he had once thought of asking Wang Ling to borrow Jinka for a mission, but after the battle at Immortal Mansion, he had completely given up on the idea. That battle had ended in a one-sided crushing victory for Jinka, so this was a true, big boss sword. At that moment, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's heart trembled as he held Jinka. Brother Ling, is this really okay? Wang Ling retreated behind him and patted him lightly on the shoulder without saying anything. Then, Wang Ling directly returned to the ground and left the battle in the sky to Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and Evil Sword God. Why didn't he make a move? The reason was very simple, because Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's encounter with Evil Sword God was a calamity that was destined to befall him, and he could only get through this calamity himself. Brother Ling, I think we should settle this battle in a more peaceful way. Like sitting down, having a cup of tea, and having a chat. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal held Jinka with a slightly helpless expression on his face. He felt that things had changed drastically in the last few days. To be honest, from the moment he held Jinka, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal already knew how this battle would end. At that moment, thanks to true immortal spirit power, Evil Sword God's injuries had mostly healed, but the blood on the corners of his mouth hadn't dried up. It could only be said that this was a genuine true immortal. Even in someone else's intrinsic spirit field, there was still spirit power as vast as the sea in his body. A wooden sword. No, there had to be a trap. Looking at the sword and grenade-throwing senior immortal's hand, the corners of evil sword god's mouth instantly twitched. Where did your friend get his sword? After those 2 slaps, evil sword god thought he already had an idea of the youngster's strength. He had seen the youngster pull this wooden sword out of the space fissure earlier, so he didn't need to think to know that this definitely wasn't an ordinary sword. As one of Wang Ling's best friends, grenade-throwing senior immortal also knew about Jinka's background. The young man in white thought for a moment, then replied, this is a children's peachwood sword for teaching, flower and bird market, 998. Mongrel cultivator. Are you looking down on me? Evil sword god hovered in the air with heaven cleaving in his hand, evil purple sword chi swirling around the blade. He pointed his sword forward. Do you know? Why was I given the title of 10-meter sword god? Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Wang Ling sat down cross-legged on the ground with his arms crossed and an indifferent expression on his face. He was aware of every movement in the intrinsic spirit field, and didn't need to look up to know what was going on. He had a rough idea of what evil sword god was trying to say. Although he had already mastered the great Sword Dao spell and learned to use the power of Sword Dao, everyone had a different understanding of Sword Dao. 10-meter sword god. Could it be that evil sword god had mastered a Sword Dao supreme skill that could kill within 10 meters? Wang Ling cupped his chin in his hand as he pondered this, when evil sword god laughed wildly. True immortals can create intrinsic spirit fields, but my intrinsic spirit field is different from other true immortals. As long as it's within a range of 10 meters, it's an intrinsic spirit field that my venerable self has created with the power of Sword Dao. In other words, as long as my venerable self unleashes the power of Sword Dao to the fullest, I will be invincible in close combat within 10 meters. Wang Ling, grenade-throwing senior immortal. This explanation caused everyone to fall into silence. The corners of Wang Ling's and grenade-throwing senior immortal's lips twitched as they felt powerless to ridicule him. So, this was how he got his title of 10-meter sword god. What kind of goddamn power of Sword Dao was this? Even if he was invincible in close combat beyond 10 meters, didn't that mean he could win as long as he watched from a distance? Grenade-throwing senior immortal couldn't help wiping at his sweat. As expected, this evil sword god wasn't a normal person. On the other side, evil sword god was very confident that he was invincible in close combat within 10 meters. He pointed the tip of his sword at grenade-throwing senior immortal. Don't think about relying on long-range attacks to escape. My venerable self has perfected the teleportation technique for many years. Once I activate the power of Sword Dao, no one will be able to escape from my grasp. Evil Sword God said in a low voice, today, whether it's you or this friend of yours, I'll kill them all. Or this friend of yours, I'm going to obliterate them both. Then I'll extract your souls. I'll torture you in the cruelest way possible. He guessed that the young man in white whom he had killed previously might have had some kind of resurrection magic treasure that could be used to pay for his life. It wasn't that such magic treasures didn't exist in the cultivation world, but they were almost priceless. The young man had already used it once, so Evil Sword God was now very confident that as long as the young man in white died again like before, there was absolutely no possibility of him coming back to life. How could there be a magic treasure in this world that could resurrect infinitely? Furthermore, this person wasn't a demi-human. Infinite resurrection or whatever, it shouldn't exist. Mongrel Cultivator, die. Evil Sword God attacked, and the purple sword chi lingering around the heaven-cleaving sword formed a pillar of chi that pierced through his body. A skeleton-shaped phantom coalesced behind him. It was dozens of feet tall and covered in armor from head to toe. This was the heaven-cleaving sword spirit, heaven-cleaving. This armor was formed from the power of Sword Dao, and Wang Ling could see through it at a glance. The sword spirit had already appeared, and this skeleton's armor was formed from the combination of the power of Sword Dao and true immortal spirit power. Evil Sword God had already unleashed his power of Sword Dao to the fullest, and he was in a completely unrestrained state. But the expression on his face didn't change in the slightest. From the moment he had summoned Jinka and tossed it to grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, the game was already over. Die! Evil Sword God grit his teeth as the power of Sword Dao surged all over his body. The air cracked open, and the space couldn't withstand the immense pressure of Evil Sword God's 100% power of Sword Dao at all. Holy shit! What should he do? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had never seen this kind of stance before. Given his current realm, it was impossible for him to fight a true immortal at his full strength. This is my most powerful power, die! Evil Sword God shouted. He held the heaven-cleaving sword in his hand, and the heaven-cleaving sword spirit behind him stretched out its hand toward the sky at the same time. A huge sword light lingered around the skeleton sword spirit skeleton, and the evil purple sword light turned into a light cannon that shot toward grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Destructive Death Ray. In an instant, fierce winds surged in all directions and space cracked. Everything in the path of the light cannon broke apart in an unstoppable manner. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal knew that he had the protection of the soul suppression ring and might not die, but if he was hit by this level of light cannon, he felt that there wouldn't even be a bloody mist left of him. There might not even be dregs left of him after this blast, but in the next moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that his body actually moved on its own. Lord Jinka. Chapter 443. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal hadn't expected this big shot's momentum to be so ferocious. Knowing that Evil Sword God was practically invincible within 10 meters, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal still pierced through the sky. In contrast to the surging evil purple sword Chi, Jinko led grenade-throwing Senior Immortal in taking advantage of the situation. There weren't any exaggerated light effects, and they were just covered in a faint brown spirit light that protected them like a Daoist robe. This sword stabbed out at the destructive death ray, which Evil Sword God had released, and drew a beautiful arc in the sky. Without any fancy sword skills, one man and one sword stabbed out elegantly. When the Peachwood Sword's brown sword Chi touched the destructive death ray which had been released in the distance, an astonishing scene happened. That clearly weak brown sword Chi was like a miracle descending to the world as it followed the center of the destructive ray which was as thick as a horned dragon and forcibly split it apart. Heavenly. Heavenly flying immortal. Evil Sword God turned pale with astonishment. The young man in white's posture reminded him of a legendary sword technique. Turning complexity into simplicity and using small to catch big was a move specially used to counter large-scale attacks, and could render powerful offensive sword techniques like Destruction Ray ineffective. However, this was a godly sword technique which had long been lost. Whether it was his Shifu sword Immortal Fan Rui or the magnificent Immortals Depository of Buddhist texts, which was the largest depository in the cultivation circle today, the dossiers on this sword technique had long disappeared. There wasn't even a picture on the title page, let alone a record, but how could this miscellaneous cultivator in white use it? Evil Sword God pondered this, and could only think of one possibility. Unless the Peachwood sword in this miscellaneous cultivator's hand was leading him into battle. If that was the case, a lot of things made sense. Evil Sword God exhaled, and the heaven-cleaving sword spirit behind him let out a long shrill cry. True immortal spirit power rippled out in all directions, and the dozen or so palm trees in the school square and the intrinsic spirit field snapped. All the windows in the teaching building were shattered, and the entire building was destroyed by this storm of sound as easily as breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Why was it that every time an almighty entered a battlefield, they liked to make their presence felt on the buildings? Holding Jinka, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sighed in his heart. Fortunately, this was only an intrinsic spirit field which had been modeled after Brother Ling's school. If this had really been no. 60 high school, that true immortal roar just now would have killed all the teachers and students in the school. Your friend's spirit sword is a little interesting. Evil Sword God licked his lips, and his long, sharp tongue changed color under the purple light of the evil death sword. Hee, I'll let you experience my venerable self's 10-meter sword Dao. Evil Sword God said in a deep voice. After that, the heaven-cleaving sword spirit power behind him said, Chi, and Sword Demon, is Yang said. Immediately after, a powerful sword principal gravitational force was generated. Like a planet, the runes leaped and converged into a circle of 10 meters. T mortal, T in brother, Ling God Ling sword, and suddenly, grenade-throwing mortal felt Chi. In the blink of an eye, he was pulled into the 10-meter circle of swordsmanship. Spirit, God. Instantly. Halo of weakness. Grenade-throwing senior immortal squeezed his hands and felt a little weak, but the brown spirit light that split off from Jinka's body very quickly diluted it and made him feel a little better. But he didn't make a sound. Instead, he clutched his chest with a shocked expression. What's this? Evil Sword God smiled. This is the holy void light that my venerable self's 10-meter sword defense brings. How is it? Do you feel weak all over? Can't use your strength? And you feel like you're sweating profusely? It's not just you, even if my Shifu Fan Rue and senior brother Yi Jianchuan enter this circle, the same thing will happen. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, Wang Ling, Jinka, Evil Sword God, how is it? Are you afraid? If you can't dispel my halo of weakness, you won't be able to move an inch inside my 10-meter sword defense. Of course, my venerable self is invincible to begin with. But as soon as he said this, Jinko lured Grenade-throwing senior immortal to attack again. Grenade-throwing senior immortal brandished his peachwood sword and drew a 6-pointed star in the air. Then, he recited a spell as he held the sword in his left hand and formed a seal with his right. In that instant, a deep blue spirit light was emitted from the 6-pointed star seal inside the 10-meter sword defense. The air was dotted with stars, as if they were in a sea of stars. Under the illumination of that starlight, all the weakening effects faded away. This looked like just a minor spell, but Evil Sword God was astonished. 9-star skies. Another legendary sword skill. Evil Sword God narrowed his eyes, greatly shaken in his heart. This was a legendary sword skill used to purify debuffs, and it had also been lost. He had actually used 2 legendary sword skills in a row. Evil Sword God suddenly felt a little tired. Is this the 9-star skies? Evil Sword God asked. That's right, this is the 9-star skies, Grenade-throwing senior immortal replied. Grenade-throwing senior immortal replied. After hearing Wang Ling's telepathic message, he now had a basic understanding of this sword technique. Furthermore, this sword art is also the highest level of the 9th level of the 9-star skies, Chendong art. Hearing this, Evil Sword God's expression instantly darkened. This was actually the highest level of the 9th level of the 9-star skies. No wonder it had been able to dispel his holy void light so easily. At that moment, Evil Sword God suddenly felt like he was doubting life. This is the end. Grenade-throwing senior immortal gripped his peachwood sword. At that moment, a voice that didn't belong to him at all came out of his mouth. It was Jinka's voice. His pupils shone with brown spirit light as he pointed at Evil Sword God. Commoner, have you ever seen a sword skill that descends from the heavens? Wang Ling looked up at this scene. As Evil Sword God had said, everyone had a different understanding of the Great Sword Dao spell, and each person grasped a unique characteristic. If Evil Sword God's Sword Dao characteristic could be said to be invincible within 10 meters, then Wang Ling's Sword Dao characteristic could be said to be omniscient. All the sword Dao in the world was a part of it, and there wasn't a sword technique that Wang Ling didn't know. It was just that he was too lazy to use it. It was just that he was too lazy to use them on a daily basis, because he could deal with all the enemies he had faced with just his fists and feet. There were many times when Wang Ling didn't think it was worth brandishing a sword or a spear. Wang Ling's great sword Dao characteristic was that he was proficient in everything. As Evil Sword God's personal spirit sword, Wang Ling had already passed on all the sword skills he had mastered to Jinka through the spirit sword contract. Chapter 444. When Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's pupils shone with brown spirit light, his aura instantly changed. Evil Sword God stood within the 10-meter sword circle, which was supposed to be an invincible domain. He had deliberately fused the intrinsic spirit field with his sword Dao. Although this greatly reduced the range of the intrinsic spirit field, the advantage was that he didn't have to fear fighting in someone else's intrinsic spirit field. So when Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field was activated, Evil Sword God had no fear at all. The greatest value of the intrinsic spirit field was that it could use the home field to suppress the enemy's ability to absorb spirit power and at the same time suppress spirit power. Evil Sword God thought that he was a genius at combining his intrinsic spirit field with his own sword Dao. At the very least, within this 10-meter sword circle, he was invincible even if he was in someone else's domain. But now, facing this young man in white, he actually felt a terrifying sense of oppression. This aura made him feel stifled. "Who on earth are you?" Evil Sword God asked, but in fact he already had a guess in his heart. He suspected that the sword spirit of the Peachwood sword had probably attached itself to this young man in white. But what kind of operation was this? The legendary unity of man and sword. Evil Sword God felt that the situation was already a little beyond his understanding. When it came to sword Dao, he felt that there was no one in the world who had a more thorough understanding of it than he did. He wasn't a venerated immortal, but he had comprehended the great sword Dao spell and mastered the 10-meter sword Dao. He had also been a genius at fusing this 10-meter sword Dao with the intrinsic spirit field to form an invincible domain. However, this extremely powerful sword Dao of man and sword as one should only be able to display such a fusion method when the compatibility between the spirit sword and its master had reached the highest state. Even for his current self, his rapport with the heaven-cleaving sword was still quite lacking. Because the heaven-cleaving sword hadn't originally belonged to him, and he had seized it midway, Evil Sword God squinted and stared suspiciously at the youngster on the ground. This Peachwood sword clearly belonged to this youngster. How could even his friend become one with the sword? He stared at Wang Ling with a dark expression. Then, very quickly, the corners of his mouth twitched, because he noticed that the young man wasn't paying attention to the battle in the sky at all. He was sitting cross-legged while holding a book and writing something. Evil Sword God used his purple investigative demon eyes to activate the Horizon Eye technique, and then saw the name of the book, one talisman and one seal script. Even the fine print could be seen clearly, the Ministry of Education's designated practice textbook for senior high school talisman class, meticulously compiled by hundreds of experts, leading in sales for 60 consecutive years. Evil Sword God's face twitched. Right at this moment, he saw the white-robed young man who had been possessed by the Peachwood sword spirit shake his hand. The Peachwood sword in his hand had already turned into light particles and completely dissipated. This was the true unity of man and sword. When man and sword became one, the body of the sword would also disappear and become one with the man. With his body as the hilt and his hand as the edge, his entire body was filled with sword chi. This 10-meter sword circle should have been an invincible domain exclusive to him, but Evil Sword God was aghast to find that the situation had actually reversed. After man and sword became one, the brown sword chi that the young man in white gave off was truly terrifying, as if he was the king of gods. Wherever that sword chi passed, the purple sword chi of the heaven-cleaving sword retreated. There was no way to think about this situation normally, because it didn't make sense at all. this was his 10-meter sword circle, which he had set up with the power of Sword Dao, and he had tried it time and time again. However, in today's duel, Evil Sword God had a feeling that the power of Sword Dao, which he had been able to use with ease in the past, didn't seem to be listening to him anymore, and the most frightening thing was that he felt an immense pressure. He had already been floating inside his 10-meter sword circle for a very long time, and there was no movement at all. It wasn't that he was pretending to be aloof. It was that he couldn't move at all, commoner. Jinka's voice rang out from grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's body. His hands were behind his back, and his whole body was covered in brown sword light. Even inside this 10-meter sword circle, his aura was overwhelming. Evil Sword God was horrified. This voice actually made him feel fear from the depths of his soul. The cold sweat on his back instantly soaked through his Daoist robe and stuck to his body. He couldn't even speak, and could only use the sword spirit contract to order the heaven-cleaving sword skeleton sword spirit to communicate. The skeleton's voice was very deep, like an emissary from hell. Who are you? Ling, don't like trouble. Must, quickly, resolve. Jinka, who was inside grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's body, completely ignored the other party's question. In the next moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal took a step forward, and in a split second, the space inside the 10-meter sword circle actually cracked inch by inch. All the evil sword chi seemed to have been purified and disappeared. It wasn't just the heaven-cleaving sword skeleton sword spirit, Evil Sword God was also stupefied. His 10-meter sword Dao had been disintegrated by this one step. No, rather than disintegrate, Evil Sword God felt that it was more appropriate to say that it had been nullified. What on earth was this Peachwood sword spirit? Evil Sword God frowned deeply. The power of Sword Dao that he was most proud of had actually been completely ineffective in front of the other party. The most frightening thing was that until now, he still hadn't figured out the origin of this sword spirit. Humans were a species that feared the unknown to begin with, even true immortals couldn't escape this. Evil Sword God thought that he had already reached the pinnacle of Sword Dao in this world, but Jinka's appearance now had completely disrupted his state of mind. For the first time, there was fear in his eyes, and his mind was restless and it was hard for him to calm down. The last time he had been this disturbed was when he had personally killed his Shifu, Sword Immortal Fan Rui. Why? In the last few hundred years, he had relied on his own strength to prove that he was a top expert in Sword Dao. But why had someone who could be said to have broken the rules suddenly appeared? This youngster on the ground who was doing practice questions, and this unknown sword spirit who had recognized him as its master, who the hell were these two guys? Evil Sword God felt that this was even more amazing than that bunch of Nanhan guys fooling around on the ice rink, blindly judging other countries' contestants for breaking the rules, and forcing themselves to win the championship. Nowadays, could it be that there really were referees who didn't return to their seats? The 10-meter sword defense had been nullified, and the skeleton sword spirit's figure returned to its normal size. It's all over. In the next moment, Evil Sword God watched in alarm as the figure of the young man in white instantly disappeared in front of him. Where was he? Evil Sword God's face was nervous, because his purple investigative demon eyes hadn't caught sight of Jinka's figure. In the next moment, there was a loud bang, and a figure descended from the sky with astonishing pressure. This was that sword technique descending from the sky. Chapter 445. The sky was very high. Jinka, who had possessed grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's body, was 10,000 meters up in the air, and his whole body was surrounded by a brown sword light. A huge pressure descended from the sky, instantly imprisoning his body, preventing him from casting any spells. Evil Sword God was horrified. He hadn't expected this sword technique which had fallen from the sky to actually have the effect of sealing a spirit. The instant he dove down from the sky, the pressure grew stronger and stronger. when Evil Sword God fell from 10,000 meters to 5,000 meters, this pressure not only made it impossible for him to cast spells, it also made it impossible for him to block it. His entire body was directly hammered into the ground, and he lay on the ground like a toad. His head, limbs, and torso, every part of his body was firmly suppressed. Evil Sword God already couldn't remember the last time he had kissed the ground at such a close distance. With him at the center, the ground started to crack. Evil Sword God couldn't breathe as his whole body sank deep into the ground, as if he had fallen into a swamp, layer by layer. He was actually going to lose. Evil Sword God's whole body froze. If it wasn't for the protection of the heaven-cleaving sword spirit, he might have ended up in an even more tragic state. What kind of pressure was this? Even a true immortal would find it hard to bear such enormous pressure. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit was also pressed into the ground like a toad, and the man and the servant maintained the same posture, which looked very comical. Unable to speak, Evil Sword God could only send a telepathic message, so nervous that even his stupid tone disappeared. Heaven-cleaving. What on earth is this sword spirit? The skeleton sword spirit, I don't know either. Evil Sword God, as they conversed, the Sky Splitter skeleton sword spirit's armor, which had been formed from sword Tao power, began to crack inch by inch in the face of this unstoppable sharpness. 4,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 2,000 meters, the pressure was getting greater and greater. When they were 1,000 meters from the ground, Evil Sword God and his sword spirit had already sunk several dozen meters into the ground. Master and servant couldn't move at all. Evil Sword God grit his teeth, separated a purple investigative demon eye, and used the sword spirit contract to share their vision. The purple investigative demon eye took in the entire scene in the sky at that moment. Evil Sword God thought that it was probably a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life. In the sky, the sword technique that the unknown sword spirit had unleashed after attaching itself to the white-robed young man's body had turned into a gigantic dark golden sword of light. It descended from the sky like a god king, bringing with it a destructive pressure. Wherever the giant sword of light passed, the space of the intrinsic spirit field began to collapse. However, Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field's self-recovery ability was too strong. The destructive power of this giant sword of light was immense, but the intrinsic spirit field's self-recovery ability was just on par with this destructive power. As a result, the destructive power of this giant sword of light could be completely contained in his intrinsic spirit field, and wouldn't affect the real world. Otherwise, with the power of this sword, all of Songhai City was going to be destroyed. Absolute suppression. Absolute spirit sealing. There was no way to resist. With the sight-sharing ability of the purple investigative demon eye, the skeleton sword spirit was finally able to see the origin of this sword. Sweat trickled down the expressionless face of the skeleton as he spoke telepathically to Evil Sword God. World-annihilating sword. Evil Sword God looked like he had eaten godly dung. Annihilating. World-annihilating sword. The skeleton sword spirit was in despair. Sword Master, we're done for. Don't play with Echo at this time, Evil Sword God, he's stuttering. The skeleton sword spirit. It was very obvious that neither master nor servant had expected to actually provoke such an existence. World-annihilating sword. This wasn't a characteristic, but the supreme secret of the great sword Tao spell. However, in today's world, apart from the primogenitor of Tao creation of the 3,000 great spells, the skeleton sword spirit could only think of one person who could wield the power of sword Tao in the great sword Tao spell to this level. Could it be? At that moment, the skeleton sword spirit, heaven-cleaving, was genuinely sweating. My king, he didn't even dare shout out his name, because it was a taboo for all sword spirits. The might of the world-annihilating sword was unstoppable. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit sensed the air getting closer and closer to annihilation. There were probably less than 10 seconds left, and both he and Evil Sword God would be reduced to ashes here and now. The might of the world-annihilating sword. This was the supreme secret that was enough to contend with world-defying magic weapons and divine weapons. All 3,000 great spells had their own profound meanings, but very few people could use them. In that instant, the heaven-cleaving sword spirit's thoughts flew as he thought of a lot. That was my king. The embodiment of the great sword Tao spell, the master of sword spirits. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit had never expected that he would actually recognize a youngster as his master. He recalled the domineering scene when the youngster had sent evil sword god flying with 2 slaps. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit felt that he had miscalculated. He should have stopped this battle earlier. But right now, he had no other choice. As a sword spirit, his job was to protect his master. No matter how evil his master was or what karma he had committed, he had to abide by the spirit of the contract. The moment the world-annihilating sword was about to fall, the skeleton body of the heaven-cleaving sword spirit activated the Protect Master Spirit Blade agreement with the sword spirit contract. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit was well aware that evil sword god would definitely die under this sword, but if he sacrificed his life to protect his master, there might still be a chance of survival. Now, they didn't have much time left. In this moment of crisis, the heaven-cleaving sword spirit didn't hesitate at all. This was a life in exchange for a life. As a sword spirit, heaven-cleaving abided by the contract and didn't think that he had done anything wrong. Because of the spirit sword contract, the moment heaven-cleaving made his decision, evil sword god already knew what on earth he wanted to do. Heaven-cleaving, although he had seized this sword from his Shifu, it had been with him for 100 years, and he had long since developed feelings for it. The second before his world-annihilating sword fell, the deep-ice shadow on evil sword god's body, as well as the evil pattern that stretched from the back of his neck to his entire back, faded away. The master and servant closed their eyes and accepted the punishment of the world-annihilating sword. However, the pain they had expected didn't happen. The giant sword of light fell without any sound or even an explosion. Wang Ling closed one talisman, one seal, and stood up from the ground. He brushed the dust off his body, and a gust of wind brushed past his black and white short sleeves to reveal his smooth collarbone. The world-annihilating sword had a variety of effects. One was world-annihilating punishment, which was a great killing move that could truly destroy everything. The other was world-annihilating purification, which was a power that could strip away the power of sword Tao. For the sword spirit who had loyally protected his master, Wang Ling ultimately chose to let him off the hook. As for evil sword god, stripping him of the power of sword Tao that he was so proud of was already the best punishment. And Jinka obeyed Wang Ling's will. After grenade-throwing senior immortal recovered, he was now at the edge of the deep pit in the heart of the intrinsic spirit field. Looking inside, he saw the heaven-cleaving sword spirit and evil sword god, master and servant, lying in the pit like a human pyramid. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, you, Wang Ling. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at Wang Ling behind him. Brother Ling, what do we do now? Wang Ling, what else could he do? Chapter 446. It wasn't that grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't felt anything when Jinka had possessed him. In that moment, he had almost had the misconception that he was sharing a body with a big shot. It was a very wonderful feeling that was hard to describe in detail. In any case, he just felt that he had become stronger. Through this incident, grenade-throwing senior immortal's definition of strength had been elevated to a new level. It turned out that in this world, even if you didn't become bald, you could still become strong. As long as they had the big boss in their hands, there was nothing to fear. In the end, when Jinka attached himself to grenade-throwing senior immortal and took out the world-annihilating sword, grenade-throwing senior immortal was taken aback by its effect. This was the highest level of profundity in swordsmanship, and it was comparable to a strike from the heavens. Who in the world would be able to withstand it? Although grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't relied on his own strength to display this kind of heaven-defying profound meaning of sword Tao, even if he had to pay the price with his life, he felt that it would be perfect to be able to use his own body to display this kind of heaven-defying profound meaning of sword Tao. Because in theory, using the profound meaning of sword Dao like the world-annihilating sword was not part of his life achievements, thus, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was still reminiscing about the battle just now. For many people, it was rare for them to have such an opportunity to be possessed by a big boss in battle. However, once they did, they would definitely benefit immensely. When it came to sword Dao, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was originally just a minor cultivator. His main and specialty were actually hidden weapons and body techniques. But this time, Jinke had attached itself to Wang Ling's body and gone on a rampage at the level of a big shot. Even though it had already left his body, that memory was still there. If he were to go back and study this memory, it would be of great help to improve his sword Dao. Moreover, it was highly likely that in a short period of time, his proficiency and various techniques in the way of the sword would even surpass his main cultivation of hidden weapons and body arts. In a situation of equal strength, hidden weapons were indeed a very good method. They could be used to attack or defend, and could even have a surprising effect in a battle. However, in a situation like today where the difference in cultivation level was overwhelming, these few sky-quaking thunders were simply not enough. This was the limitation of using hidden weapons. Standing on the edge of the deep pit, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal rubbed his chin in deep thought. A post-battle summary was necessary. In this era of peace, where would there be so many fights for them to fight? After that, the scene in front of them dissipated, and the master and servant who were originally in the deep pit maintained the posture of a human pyramid and reappeared on the ground of the real world. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal knew that Wang Ling had already cancelled the intrinsic spirit field. He looked around and found that the location was quite remote. It was the side of a mountain road in the suburbs. They actually fought in a place like this. Fortunately, there were very few people here, and everywhere Evil Sword God had passed, all the electronic equipment had been destroyed by his evil sword Qi. Wang Ling had already sent Audiobook a text message. At that moment, Audiobook was on his way here at top speed, while Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was waiting on the side of the mountain road on the outskirts to deal with the aftermath. After a dozen or so seconds, the skeleton sword spirit of the Heaven Splitter disappeared. After the battle just now, the sword spirit's spiritual energy had been completely used up. It was no longer able to maintain its virtual form. As for Evil Sword God, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wasn't the least bit worried. The world-annihilating sword had already robbed him of all his power of sword Dao. Furthermore, for a very, very long time to come, the world-annihilating sword spirit sealing effect would continue on Evil Sword God. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal turned around and cupped his fists in thanks to Wang Ling. Brother Ling, it's all thanks to you this time. But before he could finish speaking, Wang Ling's figure turned into a breeze and dissipated. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. At that moment, a figure approached from a short distance away. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal gazed in that direction with delight. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, Brother Loopy Toad, why are you here? Loopy Toad replied, my master is revising, so he asked me to come take a look. This place is too remote, and I followed your scent for a while before I found this place. Revising? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was blank. Then the one before, Loopy Toad, of course it's my master's clone. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help wiping at his sweat. This was too brutal. Although Evil Sword God had been defeated by that final world-annihilating sword. But those two slaps from Wang Ling had been genuine. It was just a clone. He had been able to beat Evil Sword God to the point where he couldn't take care of himself with just a slap, and he had even activated the intrinsic spirit field in passing. As expected, the most abnormal person next to him was Brother Ling. Too scary. Loopy Toad looked at Evil Sword God's corpse lying on the ground, and it also felt a little horrified. On the way here, it had seen the scene through the soul pet contract, which shared vision. Then, it had seen a great sword of light stuck in Evil Sword God's head, world-annihilating sword, Loopy Toad felt that a Sword Dao fanatic like Evil Sword God should be able to die in peace after being stabbed by this kind of skill. Loopy Toad sighed and looked around. Tisk, it's a little dark around here. Furthermore, this place was a little remote, and it was a little worried that Oddjewel wouldn't be able to find this place smoothly. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal looked at Loopy Toad. It's okay, it's okay. Although all the electronic products nearby were destroyed when Evil Sword God's demonic nature flared up, Brother Loopy Toad, you're here now. But now that you're here, Brother Loopy Toad, it's just the right time for light. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, did Brother Loopy Toad not notice? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, has Brother Loopy Toad not noticed? Loopy Toad, discover what? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, your dog fur is fluorescent. Loopy Toad, at the same time, roughly half an hour after the incident, Oddjewel had already arrived at Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's location. The street lights near the mountain road had been destroyed. As far as the eye could see, it was a vast expanse of darkness. Actually, as early as 2 hours ago, Songhai City's police center had already received numerous reports from the public. He claimed that there was a power outage in the area where he lived, and that all electronic products were malfunctioning. At that time, Oddjewel already had a bad feeling. After that, another call came in to report that someone was throwing smoke grenades in the sky above Songhai City, covering a distance of 5,000 li in dense fog. Although this fog had been thrown out on the outskirts of the city, it was still quite troublesome to deal with. Because they didn't know the specific composition of the fog, the traffic police patrolling in the sky didn't dare approach it at all. At present, this foggy area had been sealed off, and no one was allowed to approach. Moreover, they were doing the urgent dispersal work. That night, Oddjewel's WeChat moments was very lively. Warden Liang of Songhai First Prison, as well as the chiefs and deputy chiefs of the cultivation police stations in various districts, were all complaining one after another. While Oddjewel consoled them in his WeChat moments, he also made speculations. He speculated that the series of reactions tonight might be related to the same thing. After experiencing several major incidents, it was as if Oddjewel could sense it in advance each time something big was about to happen, and he felt muddle-headed all day long, as if he was uneasy. Starting from this morning, he had felt this way again. And it was very strong. So that night, Oddjewel sat in his office at the General Administration of 100 schools in Songhai City and quietly watched the activity in his WeChat moments, not getting off work for a long time. And sure enough, not long after the series of reports. Chapter 447. This was due to a massive power outage and the failure of all kinds of electronic equipment in the area. As Oddjewel sped up to the scene, he browsed through the comments online. They were full of wailing voices. In any case, Songhai City government would definitely have to pay a large sum of money in compensation. No matter what, they couldn't let the people suffer for nothing. But at the same time, Oddjewel was also very curious about what on earth had happened to cause such a big impact. Deputy Director Zhong Lang and Oddjewel were sitting in a car, and the driver in the driver's seat approached the destination bit by bit according to the location Wang Ling had sent him earlier. Brother Zhua, what on earth happened this time? Something big, we'll know when we get to the scene. Oddjewel's answer was ambiguous. But based on all the signs, Oddjewel felt that it was most likely a fight between immortals. Furthermore, the person who had been defeated by his Shifu this time was probably pretty powerful. Zhong Lang pursed his lips. But logically speaking, this matter doesn't involve the school or the students. Aren't we crossing the line by intervening like this? What if we get reported by other departments? Don't panic. Oddjewel shook his head and said, first of all, this matter will definitely affect the students. Zhong Lang. Oddjewel, it's almost time for the midterm exams. Now that there's such a massive power outage, the children will definitely need to study for the exams. Actually, I've already received a lot of complaints in the office just now. As guardians of the motherland's young seedlings, we have to verify what on earth is going on for the children. Zhong Lang was stunned. How could this be related? The point was that he had taken a look at the school forum in Tiabat just now, and the group of children inside were cheering. A lot of homework now had to be done on the computer, so what did a massive power outage mean? For many students, their first reaction wasn't to regret not being able to finish their homework, but to rejoice that they didn't have to hand in homework tomorrow. As for the complaints you mentioned. Saying this, Audrey was silent for a moment. He knew that the complaints Zhong Lang was talking about were definitely real. Because he had been involved in all kinds of major events in the last 2 months, Audrey's popularity had been rising too quickly. All the major newspapers were scrambling to report news about him and related deeds. There was one every 2 days, basically without a break. Furthermore, Audrey's position was related to education, so he needed news full of positive energy and worth learning from. These days, when 1 or 2 good-looking young men or women appeared in the various border defense forces, military camps, and traffic police teams, they would compete to be featured in the headlines and trending searches. It fully stimulated the people's enthusiasm to join the army. By the same logic, Secretary Dakang, the highest leader of the Alliance of 10,000 Schools, also believed that a role model should be promoted in the field of education, with more publicity, more reporting, and a spokesperson for education. And Audrey was a very good tool to use. Moreover, when it came to looks, Audrey actually wasn't bad. Although he couldn't be compared to those movie stars, his face was still fair and clean. He had a natural scholarly look, pure and untainted. For a government agency like theirs, even if they were from different departments, the competition was still very fierce. When people were at the cusp of the storm, there would always be jealous people who wanted to drag you down. But Audrey had always felt that reporting was actually reasonable. It could be considered a form of competition, although the methods used were a little underhanded. Audrey sighed and then smiled. There will definitely be complaints, but they will basically be blocked. They can't be sent in at all. Zhong Lang, But 2 days ago, I received a lot. Audrey, that was arranged by Secretary Dakang. All the letters of complaint sent to the headquarters will eventually be forwarded to us. The secretary said that this is for internal digestion, and to read more letters of complaint is also a process of self-study and self-reflection. It turned out that this had already been approved long ago. Realization suddenly dawned on Zhong Lang. 3 big words emerged in his heart: big boss, society, and can't be provoked. The car slowly approached its destination. The mountain road was located in a remote area, and the driver had in fact already reached the approximate location. But they still took a detour here for a long time. Of course, it was entirely thanks to Loopy Toad's outstanding fluorescent green dog fur that they were able to find grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and the others smoothly in the end. In this dark environment, it looked like a lump of green from a distance, both pleasing to the eye and eye-catching. The headlights of the car were facing the crime scene, and Loopy Toad's eyes were a little uncomfortable, so it simply circled around and hid behind grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Because it noticed that there were other people besides Audrey, it instantly became a little vigilant. Greetings, Senior Immortal. Audrey and Zhong Lang got out of the car, and Audrey stepped forward to greet them. It wasn't until then that Zhong Lang realized that the person who had exposed this incident this time was actually the famous, great death-courting senior, in the cultivation circle. Now, Zhong Lang understood a little why this matter had caused such a ruckus. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal cupped his fists in return. Hello, Brother Joie. I'll have to trouble you again this late at night. Audrey, what are you saying, Senior Immortal? I'm already used to it, Loopy Toad, Zhong Lang, Audrey, but can Senior Immortal tell me what on earth happened? Previously, he had only given him a location. and Audjua actually wasn't very clear about the whole story from beginning to end. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal pointed at the young man lying on the ground. Do you see this person? His background is very unusual, but he's no less a first-class criminal than the old devil. He's committed countless crimes, and his cultivation is even higher than the old devil's. He has a very deep connection with General Yi. Hearing this, Audjua and Zhonglang's faces turned pale. To be able to have a connection with the 10 founding generals, it was obvious how deep the waters behind this were. Furthermore, there was one thing that both Audjua and Zhonglang were extremely astonished: this young man's cultivation was even higher than the old devil's. Audjua sucked in a cold breath. Senior Immortal, this person is peak true immortal. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal nodded. That's right, and he has already cultivated a heavenly Tao, although your Shifu confiscated it. Ling Zhenren's warm reminder: students who haven't finished their winter break homework, hurry up. Chapter 448. He had already cultivated the heavenly Tao. Both Audjua and Zhonglang had stupefied expressions on their faces. Although they were only at the gold core stage, it did not mean that they did not know what the heavenly Tao meant. This was something that could only be touched upon after becoming a perfected immortal. Even many soul formation cultivators felt a deep sense of distance from it, let alone them. Looking at the young man lying dead on the ground, he looked around and realized that his Shifu Wang Ling wasn't here. However, the location had indeed been personally sent over by his master. Thus, Audjua quickly came to a conclusion. Combined with what Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had said before, if this young man was a true immortal big shot who had already cultivated a heavenly Tao, giving Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal strength, there was no way he could have dealt with him, so it was very likely that Shifu had left after defeating the young man, leaving Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal behind to help Wang Ling deal with the aftermath. Audjua knew that his Shifu liked to keep a low profile, so every time he cleaned up some evil force, he would immediately call him over to deal with the aftermath and then give all the credit to him. But here came the problem: this was a true immortal big shot. Even if Wang Ling, Zhonglang and Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal were added to the mix, if the three of them ran into a cultivator big shot of this level, wouldn't they be killed with one slap? Looking at the young man on the ground, Audjua felt his balls ache. This was not a good scapegoat. Since he was a scapegoat, the way he did it had to be scientific. Audjua remembered that the last time they had captured the master of Immortal Mansion, the other party had been an itinerant immortal, but in any case, all the experts in the chat group had joined forces to besiege him. Although there seemed to be a slight disparity in strength, at least it wouldn't be too abrupt. But now, a true immortal big shot had been defeated just like that. If it was only because the three of them had worked together to defeat it, it would be hard to convince the crowd. What is Brother Zhuo worried about? Zhonglang asked. I've thought about it. It's not very appropriate for us to interfere in this matter publicly. Audjua rubbed his chin and said, how about this? Little Zhong, contact Warden Liang for me and let him handle this. Zhonglang nodded obediently. Yes, Brother Zhuo. It can be said that Brother Zhuo played a huge role in catching such a vicious criminal. Why would you push the blame onto someone else? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal smiled. Audjua sighed. This walk is too heavy. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, to put it bluntly, it was still a problem of the difference in their realms. Audjua was actually quite a self-aware person. There were some scapegoats he could take and some he couldn't. When he could be half as strong as his master, he would be able to take the blame. But right now, he was actually feeling a little diffident. But then again, true monarch, I don't feel any spiritual power from this person. Is he really that strong? Audjua asked. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, Brother Zhuo, there's no need to worry. This person has already sealed his spirit and is now no different from an ordinary person. He could arrest them without worry. If he was really worried, he could request the higher-ups to use the spirit shackles. Also, I suggest that Brother Zhuo contact General Yi to handle this matter. Zhuo nodded. Senior Immortal is right. After all, it involved the 10 founding generals, so he had to be careful. But true sovereign, come to think of it, who exactly is this person? 10-meter sword god Qin Nanxian, self-proclaimed, evil sword god. Realization dawned on Zhuo and Zhonglang's faces. Whoosh, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was also very surprised. You've actually heard of him? Zhuo, no. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, it actually made sense that they didn't know Evil Sword God. After all, it had already been a long time, and Evil Sword God's identity was directly related to General Yi's. Thus, while the higher-ups had been secretly searching for clues on Evil Sword God all this time, the news that had been circulating in the media as well as the reports on Evil Sword God back then had already been sealed. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal believed that if he went to the library now, the daily newspaper that had published Evil Sword God's exploits back then would definitely be gone. Zhuo and Zhonglang were still very young, so it was normal that they didn't know. Furthermore, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal felt that even if Evil Sword God was mentioned in the chat group, there wouldn't be many people who would have a rough idea. If Daoist Guang hadn't personally fought him back then, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's lead on Evil Sword God would have been limited to that newspaper from back then. But after today's incident, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal started to have a whole new understanding of the gap between realms. Evil Sword God was really too ferocious. If Daoist Guang hadn't been a true immortal back then, it would have been hard for him to escape. By the time Zhuo and Zhuo arrived, it was already close to 10 o'clock. After that, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and Zhuo dealt with Evil Sword God's matter until the latter half of the night. Songhai First Prison. Warden Liang and his men had escorted Evil Sword God here overnight. Because of the world-annihilating sword's spirit sealing effect, Evil Sword God had been unconscious all this time. Warden Liang had directly put him in spirit shackles and sent him to the special cell. The cell door opened, and 2 prison guards carried Evil Sword God in one after the other. Warden Liang followed behind, sighing in his heart. In less than a few months, this was already the 3rd one. Warden Liang looked at Devil Emperor Guo Pai, who was meditating, and Qingyu, the master of Immortal Mansion. Eachum, they had caught a Faden before, then an archer, and now this new warrior. Oh my! The lineup for the team battle was almost complete. Warden Liang felt that he could perhaps apply for some funding to expand the special cell. The old devil and Qingyu, the master of Immortal Mansion, were still in trial. It seemed like they had been in custody for a long time, but in fact, they had only been in prison for less than 2 months. In the end, before they could get used to it, a new one had arrived. Old Liang, who's this? The old devil looked up and sneered when he saw that a new person had been sent in. He was still using Jiang Liuyue's body, and when he spoke, his aged voice was out of place. But that couldn't be helped, because the old devil was now wearing the spirit shackles, and it was impossible for him to switch his body back while his spirit was sealed. Furthermore, the higher-ups were afraid that something might happen if they removed the spirit seal and replaced the old devil with an artificial body, so they could only make do with it for now. As for the master of Shadow Stream Jiang Liyue, her soul had already been transferred from the stone ghost mask to the artificial body. She would soon be locked up in this special cell. Soon, there would be another assassin in the lineup for the team battle. No comment for the time being, but I advise you not to provoke him. Warden Liang raised his hand and had someone put Evil Sword God on an empty bed. The 2 of you, behave. After that, he left with several prison guards, and with a bang, the cell door was firmly shut. 2 minutes later, Qingyu raised his eyes and glanced at the old devil next to him. Devil Emperor, what do you say? The old devil chuckled. Of course we have to wake him up. For every newcomer who had just been sent to prison, training was an essential process. On this side, Evil Sword God was still unconscious. Two figures approached from the left and right in the special cell. Then, there were two crisp paw-paw sounds. Chapter 449. Although Evil Sword God had been arrested, given his identity, the matter had been suppressed in the end. As for the abnormal large-scale power outage in the area and the malfunctioning of electronic equipment, Songhai City's Electric Power Bureau finally took responsibility for it. The next day, the accident notice posted clearly stated that the cause of the outage was an equipment error. In the end, only those who had personally been involved would know what had really happened. That night, not long after Evil Sword God had been taken into custody, Ojo received calls from two people. The first was from his old leader, Secretary Dakong. "Hello, little Zhuzi." Ojo had already been overwhelmed by the old secretary's familiar address at the beginning, but now he was completely used to it. Ojo nodded. It's me, Secretary." On the other end of the line, Secretary Dakong's tone was a little meaningful. "I've always felt that you had an expert lurking around you. Hee, this time, you were able to capture Evil Sword God completely." Ojo was stunned when he heard this. If Shifu knew that he hadn't taken responsibility for this, he would definitely hate him. "Secretary Dakong, it's not like that." Ojo was about to defend himself when Secretary Dakong's voice rang out again on the other end of the line. "Don't be afraid. As long as you can contribute to society, I don't care if you have one or two experts by your side. But to be able to capture this Evil Sword God, I'm afraid that the senior you invited definitely isn't weak, and might not be weaker than me or Oldie at all." "Secretary, alright, no need to explain anymore. I understand you." On the other end of the line, Secretary Dakong nodded slightly and said unhurriedly, "Everyone has secrets, and people without secrets can't live on. You've won glory for our educational cause, and now you're a role model for all children. I should be the one thanking you for this. Later, if Oldie calls, directly push it to me and say that I was the one who invited the senior behind you. That way, he won't run his mouth behind my back." Listening to the phone, Ojo suddenly felt a little stupefied. It had originally seemed like something that couldn't be explained clearly, but had actually been inexplicably resolved just like that. Given Old Yi's temperament, I'm guessing that he definitely won't be able to resist coming to Songhai City when he hears about this. He might even call you. Let's get this straight first, this is more important. Old Yi is a very shrewd person. At this point, Secretary Dakong couldn't help but laugh out loud. Previously, he, Old Jiang, and I made a bet to see who could catch Qin Nanxian first. In the end, I never thought that I would be the one who picked it up. Little Zhuzi, you've made me proud again. Jua, Secretary Dakong, moreover, you did one detail very well this time. Now, after disappearing for several hundred years, he had suddenly been captured, which made General Yi very suspicious. Jua, General Yi, the news of Evil Sword God's capture is true. The heaven-cleaving sword in his hand has already been taken as evidence, and General Yi can personally verify it. Very well, this old man can tell at a glance whether the heaven-cleaving sword is real or fake. I'll set off for Songhai City tomorrow. We'll see for ourselves then. On the other end of the line, General Yi said, but this old man still has a question. Jua, please speak, General Yi. I heard that you're the direct leader in this matter. Then can you tell this old man, how was my stupid junior brother defeated? I hope you're not trying to deceive me. I've already put a curse on this phone. If you hide anything, for the next 6 months, every time it rains, you'll feel an unbearable itch all over your body. To be honest, Jua breathed a sigh of relief at this question. Because General Yi was asking how Evil Sword God had been defeated, not who had defeated him. As long as he didn't expose Wang Ling, Shuo felt that it was perfectly fine. In fact, he hadn't seen the battle with his own eyes, and had instead heard everything from Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. He just wanted to hear the truth. Recalling Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's account of the battle, Shuo replied, General Yi, it's like this. First, he was slapped twice in the face, after that, he was stuck with a big magic sword, and then, that's all. Chapter 450. July 11th, the 12th Tuesday of the semester. It had been more than 10 hours since Evil Sword God had been officially detained. When Wang Ling got home from school, he set out a brush, a talisman seal, cinnabar and other tools specially used for making talismans on his desk. He had withdrawn Evil Sword God's power of Sword Dao, but that didn't mean it had disappeared. Wang Ling's special characteristic of the Great Sword Dao spell was all-knowing, while Evil Sword God's special characteristic was 10-meter sword circle. In terms of the quality of the characteristics, the one Wang Ling had mastered was undoubtedly the best. However, Evil Sword God's 10-meter sword circle actually wasn't weak, at least in close combat. It could greatly enhance his strength and make him invincible. It was Evil Sword God's bad luck this time to run into him. Otherwise, Wang Ling felt that even Evil Sword God's senior brother, General Yi, might not be able to take him down with just the 10-meter sword circle. The talisman he was going to draw this time was an inheritance talisman, which could incorporate the Great Sword Dao spell, which he had taken from Evil Sword God previously. This was a type of legendary talisman, and there were almost no records of it in the world's ancient books. It was originally used to pass on the 3,000 Great Daos. Standing in front of his desk, Wang Ling was very seriously drawing a talisman with a brush. Crouching in the chair Wang Ling was sitting in, Loopy Toad also watched intently. Beside the table, there was also a short sheep. Inheritance talisman. Loopy Toad had never seen this kind of Dao talisman before, and it was extremely difficult to draw it. Even a professional talisman master would have a very low success rate, almost negligible. After all, this was a special talisman used to inherit the 3,000 Great Dao, not a skill scroll in the common sense. It was definitely not that convenient. What's this for? Loopy Toad squatted on a chair and blinked. Wang Ling ignored him and concentrated on drawing the talisman. On the side, Sheep raised an eyebrow and looked at Loopy Toad. Obviously, it was drawn for you. Loopy Toad was startled. It never thought that its little master would actually pass on to it the Sword Dao that he had taken from Evil Sword God. But I don't know how to use a sword. Loopy Toad sweated. It wasn't convenient for it to hold a sword with its dog paws, unless it could cultivate into a human form. However, the problem was that it had just entered the 2nd grade. It would still take a long time before it could leap to the 1st grade. From the 2nd stage to the 1st stage, there was a stage where the beast would transform into a human form, which was equivalent to the soul formation stage in the realm of spirit beasts. In the end, the beast would need to successfully pass the tribulation before it could cultivate to the 1st stage. Loopy Toad calculated its current cultivation progress. Even if it used the improved version of the Demon King Heart Sutra to speed up its cultivation, it would still take at least 50 years of hard cultivation without any assistance. 50 years to go from rank 2 to rank 1, this could already be considered as exceeding speed. If a normal spirit beast wanted to cultivate from grade 2 to grade 1, it would take at least 1,000 years. The improved version of the Demon King Heart Sutra had already increased its speed by a full 20 times. Logically speaking, Loopy Toad was already quite content. It wasn't profound sage tyrannical song. Very quickly, Wang Ling finished drawing the Dao talisman and looked up at Loopy Toad. Of course he was aware of Loopy Toad's concerns. But he actually felt that most people had misconceptions about sword Dao. True sword Dao didn't necessarily require one to wield a sword. In his previous battle with Evil Sword God had thought that the highest realm of sword Dao was becoming one with the sword, but in fact that wasn't the case. Each of the 3,000 great Dao had its own many characteristics, and according to each person's different comprehension, these characteristics were divided into many types. Characteristics were characteristics. Realm was realm. Profound meaning was profound meaning. The highest realm of sword Dao was Traceless Heart Sword, followed by Becoming One with the Sword. No sword in the hand, but a sword in the heart, this was the highest realm of sword Dao. But very few people in the world could grasp this realm. Everyone grasped different characteristics of sword Dao, but if you were skilled in cultivation, you could ultimately reach the level of Becoming One with the Sword, or even Traceless Heart Sword, then you could actually grasp the supreme profound meaning of sword Dao, the world-annihilating sword. So in fact, whether it was Wang Ling or Jinka, both of them could use the world-annihilating sword independently. When fighting Evil Sword God, Jinka had chosen to become one with Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal first before using the world-annihilating sword. That was also Wang Ling's decision. To put it bluntly, it was all for Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's sake. Wang Ling gave the inheritance talisman to Loopy Toad and told it to stick it on its forehead whenever it had nothing to do. The art of sword Dao was very complicated, but with the inheritance talisman, there was nothing to be afraid of. It could absorb a little every day, and sooner or later, it would be able to master it all. Do I really want to learn it? Loopy Toad took the inheritance talisman, feeling very puzzled. It was only its second class. At best, it was at the nascent soul stage. At the very least, the 3,000 great Dao was something that only peak true immortals could touch. Wasn't it a little too early to learn it now? Sheep crouched down and rubbed Loopy Toad's fur. The 3,000 great Dao are difficult to comprehend. Actually, anyone can master it. Why do you think I can run so fast? Loopy Toad was instantly speechless. After hearing Sheep's words, it seemed to understand a little. The gremlins in the villa who had been enlightened by Little Master Ling actually didn't have high realms, but each of them had actually mastered at least one of the 3,000 great Dao. Wang Ling had enlightened them and directly passed them on to them. Sheep, for example, was only at the soul formation stage, but she had mastered the great wind movement technique. Lord Ma, who had the highest realm and was the only itinerant immortal in the villa who Wang Ling had directly enlightened, had mastered the great devouring spell. The 3,000 great Daos were things that could only be naturally comprehended when one reached a certain level of cultivation. Moreover, they were extremely difficult to comprehend, and many people flocked to them like ducks. However, it was naturally a different story if one had an inheritance. Sheep, since Little Master gave it to you, just accept it. Loopy Toad, but I don't have a sword. Sheep, don't you still have claws? Loopy Toad, that night, an old man with a white hedgehog head appeared at the entrance to Songhai First Prison. As usual, he was dressed in a training suit with a red belt. Moreover, he didn't like to walk properly. His feet were a few inches off the ground, and his whole body seemed to be floating. Who? At the entrance of the prison guard saw that there seemed to be someone in front of the door, so he opened a small window to take a look. In the end, the prison guard's face instantly beaded with sweat. General E. General E nodded and gave a soft sound. Open the door. Logically speaking, the warden's personal approval was usually required to enter a prison. If General E was coming, there was no way Warden Liang wouldn't know. The prison would definitely have made preparations in advance. Unless General E had dropped by in person without any prior notice, the prison guard couldn't help thinking of the criminal whom Warden Liang had personally detained in the special prison cell in the early hours of this morning. It was likely that General E had come for that criminal. How could someone who could be locked up with the old devil and Qing Yu, the master of Immortal Mansion, be an ordinary person? The prison guard felt that it was inconceivable that General Yi would actually come in person. Both of them were now wearing spirit shackles, so they could not circulate their spiritual power normally. They were no different from ordinary people. It was actually quite difficult to plant 10,000 seeds. Although Warden Liang couldn't verify whether this young man who had been captured was the real evil sword god, if he really was, there was no way he, the warden, wouldn't just put on a show. It was true that evil sword god had done a lot of evil, but when all was said and done, he could be considered a backdoor entrant. Not long after General Yi arrived in the main hall of the prison, Warden Liang had already arrived with a team of people, followed by a dozen or so prison officers. It looked very ostentatious. "Greetings, General Yi." The moment he saw the old man with the hedgehog head, Warden Liang immediately smiled. General Yi nodded, floated down on a chair, and crossed his arms. "Don't stand on ceremony, dismiss the people behind you first, and then show this old man the evidence you obtained last night." "Very well." With a wave of his hand, Warden Liang dismissed the people behind him, then took out the evidence bag and directly took out the heaven-cleaving sword. General Yi took the sword and narrowed his eyes as he examined it carefully. To be honest, the moment Warden Liang had taken the heaven-cleaving sword out of the evidence bag, General Yi had already known in his heart that this sword was definitely real. Not to mention the fact that this sword now looked exactly the same as the one in his memory back then, the sword chi lingering around it also made him feel extremely nostalgic. "It's actually the real heaven-cleaving sword," General Yi muttered in his heart. Warden Liang noticed the subtle change in General Yi's expression. "General Yi, is there a problem with this sword?" "No, this sword is genuine. It is indeed the one in this old man's memory. Back then, my Shizhuan sword Immortal Fan Rue used this sword," General Yi answered truthfully. He raised his head and looked at Warden Liang. "Did that young man have a tattoo on his body when he was caught?" "I've already examined him. He was clean from head to toe, and didn't have any tattoos." Warden Liang shook his head. But what?" General Yi frowned. Warden Liang said, according to Director Zhuo's description, the tattoos on this person's body only disappeared after he was defeated. Before that, not only did this young man have tattoos, he also had dark eyeshadow. Hearing this, the corners of General Yi's mouth couldn't help twitching. Hearing this, he was already 70% sure that this young man was without a doubt his stupid junior brother. The reason why the heaven-cleaving sword was so strong was because it contained the attribute of darkness and chaos. General Yi remembered that his Shizhuan sword Immortal Fan Rue had expended a lot of effort to subdue it back then. Thinking this, General Yi said faintly, "In order to seize this sword back then, my junior brother Evil Sword God didn't hesitate to use a forbidden spell to forcibly change the contract. In the end, he was invaded by the heaven-cleaving sword's power of darkness and chaos, causing him to turn black. Tattoos and eyeshadow are his hallmarks. Warden Liang, is the person inside really Evil Sword God?" "It shouldn't be wrong," General Yi sighed. "Although this junior brother of mine used to be an arrogant person, he definitely wasn't someone who would willfully kill the innocent. Now that I think about it, he already had a plan to seize the sword from the hostage case back then, and he didn't even know that the power of darkness and chaos had entered his body." Saying this, General Yi floated up from his chair and looked at Warden Liang. "Let's go, you lead the way. This old man is going to see him. In the meantime, I'll do a final verification." A few minutes later, the two of them appeared in the special prison cell. The young man who had been unconscious earlier had already woken up. Seeing that someone had come, he had a terrified and uneasy expression on his face as he cowered in a corner and trembled. "Who are you? Why did you capture me?" "My Shifu, my Shifu is sword immortal Fan Rui, the young man screamed in alarm. Outside the prison, General Yi narrowed his eyes. How long has he been like this? Warden Liang replied, he's been like this since he woke up. Director Zhuo was here before, and said that evil sword god's appearance is completely different from when he was in battle. I had someone examine him, and the initial suspicion is that he has a split personality. General Yi nodded. Then I'll test him. As soon as he said this, General Yi directly threw the heaven-cleaving sword in his hand over. Warden Liang broke out in a sweat. General Yi, this. General Yi pinched his mustache. Don't be nervous, he's wearing spirit shackles and can't use spirit energy. After a few minutes or so, the young man cowering in the corner finally plucked up his courage and picked up the heaven-cleaving sword from the ground. Then, Warden Liang felt as if evil sword god had become a different person as he pointed the sword at himself and General Yi and laughed loudly. Yi Jianchuan. I, evil sword god, am here. If you have the guts, let me go, I want to fight you to the death. Fight you to the death, 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 one male and one female, male and female, male and female. Warden Liang was stupefied. At the same time, General Yi couldn't help smacking his forehead when he heard this. While he had been verified, he also felt utterly ashamed. Chapter 452. General Yi covered his face. This was really too shameful. With a crook of his finger, he withdrew the heaven-cleaving sword. The young man, who had initially been wild and arrogant when he held the sword, turned back into a timid and fearful look as he trembled in a corner. There was no trace of the first-generation evil sword god at all. Warden Liang, General Yi, is this what evil sword god looks like when he's in his normal state? General Yi cupped his chin and shook his head. No, my feeling is that these two personalities are both very extreme. If he's a completely normal junior brother, he should be somewhere in between them. Although he usually exudes a shameless and arrogant aura, my junior brother would never be so cowardly, nor would he make trouble out of nothing. Therefore, whether he is holding a sword or not, this old man feels very strange. Warden Liang sighed. That's right. What's right? General Yi was puzzled. Warden Liang, to tell you the truth, it was Immortal Toya who did the personality test for evil sword god this time. Director Zhuo specially contacted Immortal Toya and specially rushed here from Chrysanthemum Island. Immortal Toya's final conclusion is completely consistent with General Yi's feeling. General Yi nodded and asked, then did he say what treatment he had? Warden Liang, Immortal Toya said, mental illness needs mental medicine. Mental illness can't be cured by medicine. At most, medicine can only play a supporting role in calming the nerves. In this world, there is no pharmacist who can completely cure split personality disorder. But I feel that Immortal Toya is hiding something about this matter, and perhaps it's inconvenient for him to tell me. General Yi nodded. Warden Liang had been the head of Songhai First Prison for several hundred years, and was better at reading people's expressions than anyone else. When a person was hiding something, he could actually tell from their expressions. General Yi was also quite convinced of Immortal Toya's medical skills. Back then, the Toya clan had been world famous for their medical skills, which weren't inferior to the Shao clans at all. Furthermore, as far as General Yi knew, Immortal Toya was probably the only heir to the Toya clan's 9 cycles exquisite pagoda. This was the Toya clan's ancestral magic treasure, and a quasi-world-defying magic artifact. Not only did the 9 cycles exquisite pagoda contain the entire Toya clan's lifelong research on medicine, it was also a very powerful sealing magic artifact. But General Yi had heard that this magic weapon had been severely damaged in a great battle with the Toya clan a long time ago, and was still in the process of being repaired. When General Yi had first come into contact with Immortal Toya, he had old Tang secretly investigate the matter of the 9 cycles exquisite pagoda being damaged, and he had learned some things from there. Even so, General Yi knew very little about the real cause of the 9 cycles exquisite pagoda's damage. There was even less news about it in the outside world. Of course, General Yi had his own speculations. He felt that this matter might have something to do with the fact that the Toya clan, which had been at its peak back then, had suddenly taken a sharp turn for the worse, causing the family to decline later on. General Yi crossed his arms and floated in the air as he said in a deep voice, "If it was immortal Toya who did the appraisal, then this old man has no doubt about it. As for whether or not there is a way to cure my junior brother's split personality, this old man will definitely find an opportunity to personally ask." Warden Liang, then evil sword god, may I ask General Yi, how should this subordinate deal with him? General Yi smiled. Don't get me wrong, I'm not your superior. This old man is here purely as a prison visitor to see my stupid junior brother. Warden Liang should know better than I do what you should do. In 4 words, do business as usual. This old man never bends the law for personal gain. Warden Liang, you should be clear-headed. Warden Liang nodded solemnly and replied loudly, of course. Rest assured, General, I will definitely handle this impartially. On the other side, while General Yi was visiting the prison, Wang Ling waited for the results of Wang Ming's space survey and pondered a way to help Daoist Wang restore his body. At the moment, it was possible to use spirit lotus roots to create a body for a golden core cultivator's body. The delivery workers who had suffered at the hands of the old devil were a good example. Wang Ling had paid special attention to this matter. With grenade-throwing senior immortals' help and after negotiating with the insurance company, this group of unlucky delivery workers had their bodies reconstructed. Moreover, through this incident, this group of delivery men became famous on the internet. In the end, this group of delivery men formed a male idol group called Lotus Tyrant and embarked on the road of pursuing their dreams in the entertainment industry, but the method to reconstruct a body at the true immortal stage was clearly much more complicated than that at the golden core stage. For example, the old devil had tried to use the almighty skeleton he had found in conjunction with the transformation array to reconstruct his body. However, this method was also very risky, and the chances of success and failure were 50-50. If it failed, the skeleton that had been so hard to find would directly disappear. Of course, there was more than one way to reconstruct a body at the true immortal stage. Wang Ling felt that he still needed to think about it at length. At that moment, Wang Ling looked at the time. It was still within range of Daoist Guang's live stream. When Wang Ling opened the live stream room, the number of viewers had already exceeded 2 million, it had doubled again. Furthermore, Wang Ling realized that while Daoist Guang hadn't signed a contract yet, his real name had already been verified, and fans could openly send him gifts. As soon as he entered the live stream room, Wang Ling heard Daoist Guang's gratitude. Thank you, Light Chaser Fantasy Ague, for the 5 flying swords. Thank you, Red Sea Action is so good, for the 10 immortal boats. Thank you, Legend Loves Lowly, for the 999 broken tyrant immortal swords. Thank you, school is about to start but what if I haven't finished my homework, for the 66 primordial black crystals. Wang Ling, Daoist Guang had already played grenade-throwing senior immortal's recommendation of PlayerUnknown's Battleground, and was now waiting for the game interface. This was often the time for live streamers to talk and chat. Scanning the bullet messages at random, Daoist Guang selected a netizen's question and read it aloud. Lord Island, what do you think of Nanhan Country's whistleblowing incident? Daoist Guang couldn't help letting out a hiss as he felt that this question was a little sharp. After he read the question, someone immediately picked up the pace in the bullet messages, and countless bullet messages floated by. The Koreans were also decent people when they were alive. Let's be more civilized and burn incense first. Do you even need to ask? Of course it's to spit. Looking at the bullet messages, Daoist Guang couldn't help laughing. Calm down, everyone, our phlegm is precious, don't spit it casually. A lot of people sent question marks in the bullet messages. Daoist Guang laughed. For example, even if I save my phlegm for Grandpa Lu, I won't give it to those Koreans. Chapter 453. Wang Ling actually didn't pay much attention to games, because in his opinion, all games were pretty boring. Some civilian players who used up all their free time to create their own characters might not even be able to beat someone else's 6 yuan top-up gift bag. Money should be spent wisely. Only a meticulous life could be called a life. For example, Father Wang would use all kinds of small reasons to dock his pocket money behind his back, which Wang Ling felt was indeed pretty miserable. Furthermore, Father Wang and Mother Wang had already made an agreement with him long ago that he wasn't allowed to use his cultivation skills to earn extra money. Wang Ling understood this principle. On one hand, it was to keep a low profile, and on the other hand, Father and Mother Wang's only requirement of him at this stage was that he study hard. This was what a 16-year-old teenager should do. So a few times before, Wang Ling had asked for free delivery. Was that really stingy? Did he really care about that bit of money? It was all for the sake of being meticulous, so that he could save money to buy practice questions and study hard, and when he succeeded in his studies in the future, he could give back to society. It was like what he had said before. Money should be spent wisely. Money should be spent wisely when playing games. Except for crispy noodle snacks in the game store, money should be spent wisely when buying snacks. Except for crispy noodle snacks, money should be spent wisely when drinking drinks. Except for crispy noodle snacks, but even if Wang Ling didn't play games much, young people were certainly more receptive to new things than the elderly. Daoist Guang had only just learned how to use a computer, and there were actually a lot of things he was still figuring out. Compared with a lot of professional players, Daoist Guang was actually very clear about his own position. He was an entertainment live streamer who was working hard to improve his skills. Through the screen full of bullet messages, Wang Ling could naturally tell that a lot of newcomers to the live stream room had heard online about this old man playing games on the island, so they had come out of curiosity to take a look. Actually, a lot of them didn't care how good this Lord Island was at playing games, and had come purely to watch Daoist Guang talk nonsense while playing games. And most importantly, because of the environment, Daoist Guang's live stream had a lot of variety. Between 8 and 10 in the morning was Daoist Guang's deserted island survival time. In the live stream room, he would demonstrate how to create all kinds of fancy survival magic treasures barehanded in a wild environment. It was Daoist Guang's island delicacies time from noon to 2 in the afternoon. In the live stream room, Daoist Guang would demonstrate how to use the food resources on the deserted island to survive. In an environment of survival in the wild, any snake, insect, rat or ant was a rich source of protein. After that, it was Daoist Guang's game time from 6 to 9 o'clock in the evening. There were a lot of audience members recommending other games in the bullet messages, and Daoist Guang very carefully recorded the names of the games they recommended in his notebook, intending to try them out later. While Wang Ling was watching the live stream, it was actually almost time for Daoist Guang to go offline. The last round was extremely poor. When he landed, he found a level 1 bulletproof vest, a level 1 backpack, not even a helmet, a tachi, and 5 bandages. Apart from that, it was empty. Daoist Guang had always been a solo jungler, and never went to big cities to hang out. Daoist Guang felt that it would be safer for an entertaining old man like him to stay on the sidelines as an observer, and this would also depend on his luck. Some of the things he picked up in the wilderness were fat, while others were thin. Like this time, Daoist Guang had clearly entered a house that looked relatively big in the wild, but it was actually extremely poor inside. Some people jeered in the bullet messages. "It's over, it's over. Lord Island is going to donate again. This loot that turns into a box as soon as it lands isn't bad, but Lord Island's luck isn't good. The most flashy thing was that when Daoist Guang picked up the only weapon in the room, the katana, the bullet messages in the live stream room were all the same. Game over. Daoist Guang glanced at the bullet messages and couldn't help laughing. Of course he knew that they were mocking him. Ah, there's no time. Looking at the time, Daoist Guang couldn't help muttering in his heart when he realized that there wasn't much time left. Furthermore, he had told the audience in the live stream room earlier that this was the last round. Could it be that he really had to go offline in disgrace? Of course that wasn't going to happen. He had been entertained for almost 3 hours, he had to show off his skills to the audience in the last round. Of course, he couldn't use cheats. Live streaming platforms now had built-in anti-cheating systems, and live streamers who used cheats would be directly banned from live streaming rooms. Lord Island had read the rules before, so he naturally understood this. So he couldn't use cheats. But Daoist Guang felt that he could use a little magic. Holding the tachi in his hand, Daoist Guang pretended to hide in a house, but in fact he was thinking carefully about what kind of magic he should use. The key to playing this type of survival game was to have a clear grasp of the enemy's position as well as his own. For some LYBs in particular, location information was very important. But the game on the computer was just a pile of data, so even if he opened the heavenly eye, he still wouldn't be able to see through things.